So Chris, you would have just one Willie because there's an echo.
Well, let me get the officialness out of the way, and then we can kind of let Willie subtract himself from our group. Oh, there we go. Okay. Well, we have a very small group, and we all know each other, and that's the first thing on the agenda. So I think I'm going to move to the next thing, which is the Declaration of Electronic Meeting. Chapter 1283 of the Virginia 2020 Acts of Assembly address the ability of soil and water districts to hold electronic meetings without the need for quorum being present in a single location when a state of emergency has been declared pursuant to 44-146 17 of the Code of Virginia, which allows me to make the motion. I move that the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors has determined that the nature of the declared COVID-19 virus emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for us to assemble in a single location for the purpose of transacting business statutorily required or necessary for us to continue operations and discharge our lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities.
I'll second that.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. I see that we have Chris. Chris, are you in favor of that?
Yes.
Okay, Willie?
Yes.
Maria?
Yes.
All right, and our executive director, Laura?
Morning. Yes.
All right, all in favor. We are good to go. And Maria and Judy. Judy, did you just join, or did you guys, your squares mix around? I think you're all
I'm here.
You just joined. Okay.
I'm here.
All right. The minutes of May 18, 2021 meeting. Were there any?
I have reviewed those minutes, Adria, and would recommend that we approve them as presented.
Second.
Okay. We got a motion and a second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Maria?
Willie is aye.
Willie? Okay.
Aye.
Looks like we have a unanimous all in favor of that. Moving on to the next agenda item is our soil and water quality conservation plans. Willie, you're up with project year 22 secondary consideration and cost lists and caps. Go for it, Willie.
Okay. Let me address the secondary consideration first. Usually we're required to have some secondary considerations that we use to prioritize those who may be competing for cost share funds. And this has to be approved by DCR. However, we usually take it to the technical review committee just for discussion and then present it to the board to approve us sending it to DCR for review and approval. Our secondary considerations for cost share the program year 2022 would include the following: that lands with NVSWCD approved conservation plans meets the Fairfax County Chesapeake Bay Preservation Program requirements, that operations with higher animal units per acre, i.e. density, and closer to environmentally sensitive features be considered, and applications requesting new BMP installations be given priority over those requesting reinstallation of a similar practice that had expired its lifespan. And then finally, that cooperators with history of successful participation be given preference over those who have in the past probably had challenging experiences with. In addition, the district would consider what they call the conservation efficiency factor, CEF, commonly referred to as KEF, when comparing cost share applications. That is, if we have multiple. Basically, what the KEF is a ranking that is put together in the cost share tracking program, wherein about 11 factors are being considered factors such as steepness, distance to a sounds like I'm echoing, distance to a creek, etc., etc. And the lower the KEF factor, the higher the need for conservation assistance.
Willie,
Yes, sir.
this is John. Is that efficiency factor new this time around?
No, it's been there for a while.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that is just to help in case you get into a quagmire, you have competitive practices. That is one way that the district can use to decide which one has priority over the other one. In addition to that, there's also the need for us to have a cap in our cost share funding program for the program year 2022. This is one that the board has to approve. DCR has no control over that, but they require that we send them a copy of what our cap would be. DCR had set a cap for $150,000 per program. We usually don't set a cap as such, even though DCR gives the district the option to lower that cap, 70,000, 45,000, whatever the district wishes to do. We don't usually set a cap because, number one, we never have as much as $150,000 anyway. Number two, we're always struggling to get programs, to get cooperator to participate in the cost share program. So there's never been a need for us to set a cap. But it's important though that if we set a cap, we monitor that cap through the ag tracking program, because the way the program is set up, it does not identify lower caps. It can only identify the $150,000 cap. So if we want to set a cap for ourselves, we need to just monitor that through our in-house accounting system. But as I said, in the past, we've never had a cap. We just let it go. And we just threw a statement in there that would administer our program in accordance with the Virginia Soil and Water Conservation Board policy and procedures as far as cost share is concerned. So Adria, that addresses the secondary consideration and the cap.
I don't have any concern with those secondary considerations. I think, at least as far as I'm concerned, the board would probably approve them.
Yeah, so it'll be a case for us to present to the board, and the board just approves us forwarding it to DCR for approval. They do the approval of the secondary consideration.
Willie, there's really no big changes in those from previous years, is there?
No, there has not. No. No.
I haven't heard from Chris.
I have no concerns. And Chris, do you have any concerns about the information that Willie just presented?
No, that sounds fine, particularly since it's consistent. And
Okay.
I was on mute by mistake.
That's okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Willie. Anything else from this part of the agenda?
Well, shall I continue with the agriculture cost share cost list?
Yes, let's do that.
Okay. So basically that one is, again, the DCR requires all districts to have a cost list available for the cost share program. This year, there's a slight change in the sense that DCR has given the mandate to all districts to set their own cost lists, especially for practices that they encounter occurring frequently. For instance, putting in a pipeline, building a fence for stream protection. So the district can use the guidelines based on experiences with the past costs to establish an average cost list for programs for program year 2022. However, they're saying that because the prices seem to vary so much, especially during this COVID period for materials especially, they're encouraging districts to go high, because knowing that, how can I put this? Knowing that the actual payment to the cooperator is not going to be based on just the estimate, but the amount, the documents or the receipts that will be produced at the end of the program for reimbursement. So districts have the privilege to set their standards, their own cost list as best as they want to do it. Now, it's important to note that the DCR had also, as part of the changes, had also allowed districts to make changes mid-year on those cost lists. However, there is a lot more to it if you make immediate changes, because you have to go back and equally amend all the cost share practices during that program year that you had approved. So even though that's in the back pocket of the districts to do, it's not the best thing to do, because there's a lot more work that has to be done to bring everybody back to speed. Our district had in the past used NRCS's average cost list to estimate cost share practices, with a percentage increase based on the experiences with the actual projects we've had in the past. And that has been like 25% above NRCS's cost list. However, we all know that material costs have skyrocketed during this period. And so staff is proposing to the board that rather than go with the 25% increase over NRCS's cost list, we go to 30%, based on the fact that DCR is encouraging us to go higher because it's only an estimate. So for our cost list this year, we're proposing that we stick with NRCS's statewide BMP guidelines with an increase of 30% to meet to become comparable with relative cost of material this year.
And for some materials, that 30% is probably still low.
I would think so too.
But at any rate, I don't have any problem with 30%. I'm just one director.
Was that a consensus of all the staff and Laura?
Well, that's a proposal from, I say staff because I'm the one writing it, but I discussed it with Laura. Laura is aware of it. And we had a training with the DCR for cost share practices. And I'm leaning my recommendations to what came from DCR. And John is right, this might be higher, but again, this is just an estimate. So it's not like it's etched in stone.
Well, if you building anything with wood, your cost escalations right now are much higher than normal. They're triple at least what they were last year.
Can I ask, usually the NRCS cost list changes. Usually we receive an additional copy in the fall. So because they're on a different fiscal year basis, their fiscal year kind of changes again in October or so. So we typically get a new cost list at that time. Do you anticipate that their cost list is also going to incorporate some changes for, material costs?
I would think so, because the cost list is based on costs of practices installed across the board. Yes, I would think there will be an increase. However, I still don't think it would reach the need that we need here in Fairfax. So that's why we're looking at 30%, hoping that they would also beef theirs up or boost theirs up to take into account what has happened in the last year, which was this COVID period where material, especially wood, like you said, Chris, that has gone up significantly.
I'm sorry, just one last point. I think I think that this is a great approach at this time. And I think that as that new cost list comes out, we can take another look at that in the fall if we need to, and see if there's need for any additional modifications. Would anticipate that those cost lists are going to continue to go up again to address some of this inflation in terms of material costs. And if there's a need to make some minor adjustments at that time, I think we can do that.
And these are just our cost estimates. Final cost share payments are made on the final bills.
That's right.
That's correct.
And Laura, to address that point, when we get to read the proposal to the board for this cost share guidelines, that's why I specifically put in there the latest NRCS statewide estimated BMP costs. So we know that the latest one would go by. But you know, by October, if we feel there's need for us to revise or revamp this, we can do that.
Adria, I'm comfortable with the 30%.
And, yeah, Willie and Laura on top of this stuff, I'd go with whatever their thoughts are.
Okay. I'm comfortable with the 30% as well, with the thought that we might have some increases. So, all right.
I agree.
So this is a decision the board would make on at the next
Tuesday.
meeting,
Next Tuesday.
and then we're required to just send it to both David, Brian, and Debbie Cross.
That's right. So it'll be on the record. So we'll just have the TRC make the recommendation for approval of these forms. It'll just be part of our report.
Yes. Thank you, Laura. Okay. Anything else on this part of the agenda, Willie?
I have 2 conservation plans. If
Okay.
let me know when I can continue, go with it.
I'm ready for you.
Okay, Laura, I'm not sure. We got to share a screen here.
See, Willie, can you let me see? Do I need to make you the presenter?
Yes, if that would work. Last time we had a little bit of a problem, but we'll see how it goes this time.
And Laura, I'm still showing up as co-host, and I sure don't need to be.
That's all right, John. I'm full on host now. I've got the recording started when the meeting began as well. So you're in good shape here, but we can try to modify that later. Willie, do you see the share content button at the bottom there?
Let me see. Share content, share content. Give me 1 second. I got a few things open. Okay, I see share. And let me get to screen 2.
While that's going on, I'll just make everybody jealous that there's a wood duck mom and 5 babies swimming by in the lake.
Oh, my. Wonderful.
And very
Beautiful.
jealous. Between hearing that and seeing the pictures from John of the fox kits in his backyard, you guys really have a lot going on. That's very cool.
Is my screen showing now?
It is for me.
It is really.
So that's the presentation screen. Okay. So if I may continue, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the technical review committee. We have 2 plans to review today, and one is for the Costers Family Agriculture and Forestal District. That's about 20.3 acres in size, and they have an equine operation with 3 horses in the Pope's Head Creek watershed. Of that 20.3 acres, they have. Is there a question, John?
No.
Oh, okay. Of that 20.3 acres, they have about 6 acres that is being kept in pasture. They have Johnny Creek running along the western side of the property, and an intermittent creek that flows across the property, creating a 2,450 linear feet of RPA within the entire property. And they need to have their conservation plan revised because it's time for them to revise their agriculture and forestal district status. The second
How often does that status have to be renewed?
Well, for the ANF district status, they want to have a current plan each time you're renewing your status. However, the plan should be renewed every 3 to 5 years because that's when the nutrient management component of it becomes expired. So there are 2 aspects to this. They're required to have it a current one for ANF district status, but in practice, they should have renewed this about 3 or 4 years after the time it was prepared. And the second plan would be that of Almer's equine boarding operation. These are new property owners. They bought the property that was once a horse operation, and now they're looking at whether they want to maintain that portion of their property as a horse operation. They have about 3.2 acres in all, and about 2 acres is devoted to the equine status thing. And so there's no Chesapeake Bay Resource Protection Area on site, and they need assistance with pasture and waste management. So let's go to the ANF district status. If you're looking at your property right now, what looks like a radar gun in black outline is the entire 20.3 acre property of the Costas family that's pending renewal of the ANF district status. They do have 2 residences on site. And I'm hoping you can see my cursor. This is resident number 1, and this is resident number 2 down here. The driveway of resident number 1 flows in that direction towards the north and starts at the terminus of Fox Shadow Lane, which connects with Clifton Road running north and south along our eastern side of our presentation. Johnny Moore Creek is what we see on the western side flowing north to south. And the other perennial flow you see here is an unnamed tributary that feeds Johnny Moore Creek. Both these properties, both these natural drainages present some RPA delineation for the property. I'm showing you this because I want to point out how complex this property is. It looks like nice and flat here, but it is not so. It's got lots of environmentally sensitive features such as very steep slopes, highly erodible soils, RPAs, and then over it all is the horse operation. Before I go to my next slide, which I'm in right now, I was going to point out that this is a house sitting at the top of the hill, the house that we as residence number 1. And field number 4 is purposely labeled because we want to make a reference to it. But let's just look at the steepness of some of these fields. For instance, where my cursor is right now, that slope that you see there is a D slope. And our D slopes are ones that range from 15% to say 25%. Field number 4, which I purposely left label, is to highlight the fact that the slopes that we see here right next to field number 4 is an E slope. I think Dan is here, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but E slope is about the steepest one I have seen in this area. And that is a 25% or higher slope. Field number 4 is indeed a pasture area, so there are several concerns. In addition to that, let's reference field number 4 again. What you see there is a Glen Oak soil on a D slope. I'm sorry, on an E slope. So that's potential for massive erosion. On this other field, which is field number 1, we also know there is a steep slope of 15 to 25%, a D slope, which is also criteria for erosion. Let's look at the complexity of it now. In green are the fields, the field limits, I should say. Again, we have the black line being the property lines, and for reference sake, we have field number 4, which is here. And you can see it also has RPA, the steep slope which you've seen before, and the tributary that flows through. Now, some of the recommendations I made here include, let's take field number 3, which is on the far side here. Field number 3 is a very narrow field, about half an acre in size. But if you notice the buffer distance between the perennial flow and the fence line, not the fence line, the limits of the field, it's very narrow, it's inadequate. It's only about 10 feet at the narrowest point. So one of my proposal, it's one of 2 things. Either I ask them to enhance the buffer to make that a 35-foot wide vegetated buffer. And then to consider doing to consider using an in situ type of buffer enhancement, which is using live stakes that you just push in the ground and they grow later on and become dense vegetation. In addition to that, the vegetation stand that runs along this ridge here has significant amounts of autumn olive, which is a rather invasive shrub, or can be small tree. So I suggested they remove those, and before they even remove, they should have live stakes in place to replace, so that as they cut down and treat the exposed stem, they can introduce the live stakes that they would have bought already. The practice here is to have the horses roaming freely all through this these fields. They're fully aware that they have a sensitive, an environmental sensitive property. So their horses it's not confined to one field, number one. And then number two, they take their horses away to a farm, to one of the farms, Mr. Custer's farm in Knoxville. So during the winter months, the horses are in Knoxville. And come spring and summer and part fall, they come back home and they roam around freely. So because of that roaming around that the horses do, they really don't have an accumulation of waste that could be of big concern to us. Nonetheless, because they have a barn here and a sacrifice, what they call a sacrifice here, it's almost unused, I'm proposing that they consider having a manure treatment area, which is on this side in brown circle, so they can at least have some confined area that can compost their waste before they spread it. We did the usual thing of doing soil tests throughout all the fields, and I want to bring to you a summary of the test result. This is different from what you used to see. The reason I'm showing this is because I want to show relative variation in the nutrient level and the pH level. But first of all, we want to identify that fields number 1, 2, 3, and 4 that we've seen in the map belong to the Custer's family, which is right there. It says track, Custer's track. The next thing we want to look at is just the pH. That's where I like to focus my attention, because if the pH is right, then most of the nutrients will be used up by the plants. If it's not right, then other invasives would come in and compete and may result in overgrazing. And by the way, one of the Custer's family concern is the dominance of Japanese stilled grass, which, if the pH is not right for your grass to grow, then they tend to come in. Once we've seen that, you can see there's an average of 1.5 tons per acre of lime that's required on all the fields. Next thing we can look at is the usual nutrient level. And we can see how the phosphorus level ranges from low, and moderate at best. And then the potassium level is high, moderate, high, and moderate. So a nutrient management plan was prepared based on those soil types. And this is what we see here. It's not for you to read because there's lots of numbers in it. But what I just want to point out is that because they haven't been accumulating their manure, composting, and spreading, there's no contribution that we can talk about from the manure handling activities. So whatever the soil needs is translated to the commercial application, which is on the far right-hand side. That should be added to the field to bring it up to maximum yield. But however, and it's in the plan, because of the sensitive nature of this fields, I propose that they be very discretional in the application of their nutrients. And so that brings us to the plan for the Custer's family, which is the 20.3 acres with 6 acres of pasture to be treated, to be planned for. And my recommendation for them I'm not sure I mentioned this, field number 3. By the time they install that buffer of 35 foot wide, which is what I'm proposing, that field will diminish to probably 0.3 acres or less. And considering that that's only a small portion of the rest of the 6 acres, I recommended to them to consider converting that pasture, field number 3, to a wooded piece of parcel, and referred them to Jim to see what they can do to best transform that particular property parcel. Any questions on this particular one?
Willie, this is John again.
Yeah.
If I heard you right, you kind of said very quickly that sacrifice area was hardly used. Is that just because the horses roam around?
Yes, they have the gates of all the fields open, and they just go in and out and just roam around.
Why do they have the sacrifice area?
I believe, well, this has been in a horse operation for many, many years. In fact, prior to the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Program. And that's the reason why I want to use the word grandfather, to have the field encroaching into all those environmentally sensitive pieces of area of the property. Under normal condition, after the Chesapeake Bay program, the district would not have approved or recommended they have the fields going in there. But because it's been there prior to 1993, we just have to work with them to minimize whatever pollution they can make. So whoever had the property before had that sacrifice area and the barn. And so I think that's just a relic of what when they acquired the property.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So
So
Willie,
Willie, go ahead, Adrian.
they're grandfathered in on that, and I understand that, but the practices that they are grandfathered in on and their actual practices of leaving those gates open and allowing different grazing practices, and meaning they really don't have field 1, 2, and 4. They really just have one field.
Um,
Right?
no, I probably didn't explain that very well. They do. They have fences wherever you see the green lines of fences, but what they do, they keep the gates between these fences open. So the gates, they have gates where they can confine the horses, but they keep them open so they can flow freely through.
And does that change the quality of that area, or just change, or does that change in any way the pasture and its wear and tear?
It could, but when you consider the fact that they have usually just 2 horses over a 6-acre pasture, that is okay. That you
Okay.
really don't have that much of an overgrazing situation. The horses naturally migrate to where the new grass is growing, and they habitually want to hang out in field number 2, and then they move when there's not much grass. So yes, it could have, but because they have a low density, in that case, it's 1 horse per 3 acres, which is what NRCS actually recommends.
Right.
But in addition to that, they remove the horses during the winter months, so the grass field has time to reestablish themselves. And
Willie, following up on Adria's comment, I understand that they leave the gates open, and right now the horses move freely. And I presume somebody's monitoring those different fields, though. So if there was overgrazing, they could actually control some with the gates.
well, definitely yes. And in fact, I'll tell you this. I will point out this as well. Field number 1. If you remember, I mentioned the property owner has concerns about stilt grass. Field number 1 in that region where you see the RPA, the shaded area, there's tremendous amount of stilt grass in there. The reason being that the horses, when they're in town, when they're on this property, love that shaded area because it's cool, especially in the summertime. So they just trample along there, and so the grass doesn't do very well. Also because of the shade. So one good recipe for stilt grass to take over is cool conditions, mainly like wooded areas, pH, less acidic, and things of that nature. So I recommended that they do certain things, i.e. remove the stilt grass, which is not hard to remove, but that they do significant planting and pruning of the branches to bring in some more light into that particular field.
Willie, the field 2, it appears that even though there's a fence shown, that the buffer is almost non-existent with the stream. Is that accurate?
You said the buffer is non-existent. Come again?
Just the aerial seems to indicate that field 2 actually runs right up to the stream bank. Is that accurate?
Not really. The field 2 is the green line. The limit is the green line that you see. And the distance between the green line and the blue is just the buffer that they have provided.
Okay.
Was that your question?
It just seems like there's not any trees in that buffer.
Oh, well, yeah, you're right. There isn't much. There isn't much tree there that you can boast about, but they're kept out of there. There's a gate that connects those 2.
Just your original comment on field 3 having deficient buffer and wanting to extend it to 35 feet. It'd be great if there was an effort to plant that buffer to get more root systems into that floodable area. And I think the livestock issue is questionable just because it has a time of year restriction based on dormancy of the material. And the deer browse there is probably horrific. So establishing replantings, or hopefully you could even recruit volunteers as well as do some planting. But it'd be good to see more root mass in those bank areas.
Sure. And I can extend that because remember I told you about field number 3. I can extend down to field number 2. Now that's to enhance the buffer vegetation, not because they have enough buffers width there. Does that do it?
Yeah, the other thing is the area where you were mentioning at field one was a lot of stilt grass issues and the woods around the field.
Yeah.
The other, I agree, it'd be great to have Jim give him some recommendations on improving that woodlot. It's likely going to be partly keeping the horse out of it to some degree, because in order to get some regeneration going, you're going to have areas where the horses aren't browsing and trampling the soils. So it might be good to, again, I like your recommendation, getting Jim to give them some advice on how to potentially get some regeneration going in that woodlot.
So we're talking about field number 3, right?
Field 1, as you were mentioning, is stilt grass around field 1, and the fact that the horses go in there freely into the woods around the field.
Right.
That might be an issue where restricting horse access might be part of that effort to get that stand in better condition, that woodlot stand.
My recommendation, again, to preserve the life of the trees, is that they should protect those trees, especially the large ones, with box fencing or with some kind of a mesh around to keep the horses from gnawing. There is no evidence of it right now, but those are things that you want to do, because horses, their habits change based on how bored they are and what exposures they've had, some other places they've been to, etc., etc. So I have in my plan those things as a recommendation that they can consider.
Anything else for this one?
Not for me.
I'm good. Thank you, Willie.
All right.
Normie,
So
I
Adria,
just wanted to note that, I'm really glad to see that they did keep the fencing around the stream area. I think that somebody had some foresight to keep the horses out of the streams. And that's really good. But good plan, Willie. And I appreciate the recommendations as well to look at buffer enhancements along that tributary to Johnny Moore.
sure, yes. Good idea, too. Adria, may I go to the next plan?
Yes, thanks, Willie. I like the idea of field 3 and the reforestation there. Thank you.
So field number 2, plan number 2 is that of the Almer's horse operation. As I mentioned, these are new people that just acquired this piece of property. And just an aside, if any of you can recall the horse brochure we have that talks about horse-friendly, whatever title, I can't remember now. This property was used as a model to create the ideal horse operation that we illustrated on that program, on that pamphlet. But let's get back to today. That's yesterday's talk. Let's get back to today's talk. You can see the property in green line, and the front portion is which we call the residential area, and the lower back area is the equine operation area. There are 3 fields: the front field, the middle field, and the back field. Just to make sure you see what really is on the ground. You probably can tell how bad erosion is on the property based on the vegetation type. But I think this was taken at winter time when things were at its worst. So the red and black dotted line you see here is, first of all, they use the middle field as the sacrifice area, the entire field is sacrifice area. That's too large for 2 horses only. So my proposal is that they build a more confined, heavy use of sacrifice area, which could be about where the red and black dotted line is. Purposely kept the trees within the dotted lines so it could provide some shade for the horses, even though they would have access into the barn. The barn is the yellow structure, little shade you see there. If we move our attention down to the backfield, the backfield is an open field, just field number 3. I'm proposing that they subdivide that into 2, 3A and 3B as the map shows. and install a temporary cross fence across, which is showed in green and black dotted line. The main purpose of that is because, as you can't see from this, but the property drains towards that southeast corner. And so there's a wet spot here where my cursor is right now, shaded in gray. So in order to keep that area from just getting mushed up and trampled, the temporary fence would help to restrict the horses' access until ideal probably time like this, when we have extended duration of dry periods. That area will be nice and dry for horses to graze on. Because they're concerned about, let's say, erosion and waste management, the plan is heavy with more details on those two issues. So let's keep our focus on the barn, because the next picture I'm going to show is a barn, and begin to tell you why there's so much erosion, aside from the horses being there all the time, on field number 2. So the north side of that barn is what we're going to be seeing in a second. So what we see here is the north side of the barn, as I was pointing out to you. You can see it has gutter and downspout that's buried underground. But if you look on the far side, the south side, there is no gutter. There is no downspout. And for your information, this buried pipe here is discharged right here along the fence line. So imagine all of this roof runoff from the barn coming into that exposed pasture number 2, which, by the way, is also of Glenelg soil. Let me try to bring you to see what that field actually looks like. That's the middle field. And if you look closely, you can see gully running across that field in that direction. If you look closely, you can see where the downspout ends somewhere in this corner and flows in that direction, join this mainstream and go out that way. So my recommendation is for them to have the gutters treated on both sides of that barn, keep it underground, and discharge it in a safe area somewhere out here in the backfield. So basically what I was looking at is to have a sacrifice area that would run from sort of this fence post here out that way, behind those trees, up this way and back up. So you would have a less area of excessive trampling. And that smaller area can be treated like we recommend all the time, with the degrees of aggregate, geotextile fabric, and proper drainage, so you would have water running off. And the rest of the field would then be enhanced to have grass growth. They don't have a manure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is John again. Since you mentioned that sacrifice area, I presume your proposal would be the properly designed sacrifice area, and that's what you just described. Are they likely to be able to afford that?
It is likely they won't, but I give them what the standards call for. During our conversation, I always tell them that this is like the Cadillac of that, and this is, if you have to have cost share for this, is what you would have to meet. I sometimes give them pamphlets of all the types of sacrifice areas that are made they're a lot less expensive, but may not last as long. And so that's the approach I take. I give them what the standards call for and advise them. It's like when we do the nutrient measurement plan, I tell them this is what is needed, but you don't need to have all of this on your soil. That's because I want to make sure, they enhance the soil a little bit, but not try to maximize the growth. Because most horse people in Fairfax feed their horses with hay. As you can see, hay is the main source of feed for horses. So yes, John, that's what I give to them, and I caution them that don't let the cost scare you away. There are other things you can do, but I'm required to give you the standards, which are NRCS.
Well, I understand that. I guess my concern, Willie, is if they don't have a properly designed sacrifice area, they really are still going to have a mess there.
Mm-hmm. True. If we think of it, though, John, if only they confine the total sacrifice area to what is really necessary, then that's less of an area that's eroding. Other areas will be grass, and the horses will be happy. They can have the daily exercises, they can have the hay, they can have water, they can have salt within the confines of that smaller, let's say 20 by 20 or 20
Yeah,
by 30, whatever the case may be. Yeah. So from this, let me move you to another view, which shows the backfield a little bit.
Actually, Willie, before we move on, can I just make another suggestion and
Yeah.
perhaps encourage you to encourage the property owners to consider some detention in that area too, through the use of a cistern or some other, well, a cistern perhaps in that area. And that could be something that VCAP could potentially support them with as well. And I don't know if that's, well, you definitely know the property owners, whether or not that's something that they would see as being feasible, but you could potentially put 2 pretty large cisterns on the sides of that barn for use with the horses as well.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I'd be happy to include that on the plan and just make that as an option that they would consider.
It won't
making note of it,
necessarily
right?
get the water, away, but it may detain it for a little while and then allow it to slowly be released. And they could use it as well for watering, perhaps even that pasture area at times, or the nearby pasture areas.
Sure, I'd be happy to include that in the plan.
Willie, this is Chris. Earlier you said that this was once used as a model, but that was then. What conditions changed between the model year and now?
Oh, so when I said use of the model, I don't mean it was a model operation. I meant the parcel, which I think is typical of standard parcel. It has, it's not a huge acreage, like 3 acres for 2 horses, which you see a lot of, and it's elongated. And there are things that can be done to improve. For instance, build some screening along the fence line from neighbors throwing touch at the horses. And the back area where I say is wet, I talked about fencing that off, which is what I said again. And because the illustration in our plan is more to the book, I talked about having a warm season grass field and a cool season grass field. I'm just saying that this is used, that property was where I walked when I was preparing that write-up, and say, this looks like a typical property that would be for a suburban type of horse operation. So it's not like it was perfect. It wasn't perfect. And as a matter of fact, much has not been done to it between then and now. I think that middle field has been ruined more than it was before.
That's too bad.
Yeah, so should I move on? So the next one just shows that middle field, shows the watering trough they have, and the lower field on the far side is where the wetness is. I think you can tell by the depression there, because all the property drains in that direction and into that intermittent creek, which is at the back offside. I want to show what the soil test, we did the soil test for all 3. I want to show what the soil test looks like. And again, let me just point out why this summary shows you can do a comparison compared to when I showed just one field. But let's focus on the nutrient level of the various fields. We can see the first one is the back field, the second one, the middle one is the front field, the last one is the middle field. But look at the amount of phosphorus that's in those 3 fields. In fields 1, in the back field and front field, it's low. In the middle field, it's moderate. Potash. In the back and the front field, it's moderate. In the middle field, it's high. That tells us something. That because we have vegetation on both the front and the back fields, nutrients are being used up. So you have relatively lower phosphorus and potash. Because there is not much vegetation in the middle field, and we have horses in the middle field, the droppings there replacing lost stuff. But the phosphorus, as we can see, is moderate, because what happens to phosphorus, it binds with sediment and may get washed away, like we see in that field, erosion taking place. So phosphorus is being displaced, even though there's not much demand for it. Potash is showing high, because we know that potash doesn't really erode away. It accumulates in the first 18 inches of your soil. And so we have higher readings of phosphorus. That high may have been normal if we had significant grass growing there. That moderate would have been low if we had more grass growing there. So this is just things that planners would look and say, oh, this is how I interpret this variation, because it's the same management style across. I don't think they've added much fertilizer or lime to it, but it's the same management style across. So with those variation, one just gets some kicks from analyzing things that way. But anyway, a nutrient management plan was put together for this, and the appropriate amount of fertilizer to be added was put in. And because I'm encouraging them to start composting, I had put in a standard analysis for waste into their practice, into their nutrient management plan, so that when they begin to compost, we go back and do a site-specific waste analysis and then plug that into the plan itself.
Is that composting facility one of the practices you're suggesting?
Yes. In fact, let me go to the next slide and just show you what I have here. The next slide shows in the corner here, it's a manure handling area. You can see the brown square there. That's a manure handling, based on the legends, a manure handling area. So that's why I propose they have it, because it's close to the barn. It's, it's in the corner out of the main area of activities. And it will be easy to spread the manure from that location to either field, the front field, middle field, or the back fields. Again, they only have 2 horses currently. And yeah, so it won't be too bad. 2 horses on 2 acres is pushing, but if you manage it right, it works, especially with the sacrifice area.
Willie, you said the receiving water, the drainage is down to the lower left. Is that manure area close to that?
No, manure, if you look at the scale, Chris, that manure is at least 75 feet from that wet area. Do you agree?
Yeah, but I can't see the creek, but.
Well, the creek is an intermittent flow. It's just outside the property line, flowing from west to east. From east to west, below south of that property line. So in other words, that drainage from this property and the adjacent lots come through. If you look at this picture, you would see the gully that's forming there. Can you see like a Y shape? One from that middle field, another one from the far end of the middle field, meeting at a point, and then continue down to the loose spot.
I was just wondering if the manure being over on the right side would be much further away.
Oh, like over on this right side here?
Uh-huh.
It could be. Our plan, it could be. It could be one or the other, because here you're setting it up to be in the flow path of all that water coming in. Here you're eliminating that flow path, which the Y that we see there. And it's not like it's higher, but it's not that much. It's not lower to have interference.
Well, you know the lay of the land. I don't.
Yeah, but no, it makes some sense. It could be on either locations, actually. So, with that, those are the 2 plans that I have for you to consider, and I've gotten some input which I'll be happy to include into the final plan that will be sent to the board for approval, unless we have other questions or other recommendations.
Any other questions?
Not for me.
Not from me.
Willie, I hope that they're able to get their pasture drainage a little bit better.
Yeah. I feel if they can manage that water flowing through the fields, there'll be much less erosion taking place. But they also need to do some vegetative improvement. Thank you.
All right,
Lauren.
thanks, Willie.
Look, Adria, sorry.
All right. Next on our agenda is Judy. Judy, you have some conservation assistant application and reimbursements.
Correct. So I will be walking through the three conservation VCAP applications for this month, and then turn it over to Dan. He'll go through most of the reimbursements we have for this month as well. So we've got a bunch of things for you all to look at, and then we're going to talk about some of the policy change recommendations for this year too. So let's see if I can get my presentation up here.
I think you might have to stop sharing your screen.
Right. I'm working on that right now. Let me see. Keep seeing your face, Lauren.
Oh,
If
there
that
you go.
works. All right.
Am I out
How
now?
we look?
Yes, I think so, right?
You see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen.
We see it.
Okay, good. Okay, great. All right. So, as I said, we have three applications to look at this month. The first one is the Kana Conservation Landscaping Project. It's in the Acton Creek watershed here off of Rolling Road, pretty close to the creek and Acton Lake. The Kunas, I believe Willie visited the site for its site visit, but what they're dealing with is some mature canopy and wooded situation and a fairly steep slope coming down the side of the property where you see the gate there. And then it levels out under the trees and turns into this sort of woodland floor. So it's over on this area near the red barn that they're really experiencing some erosion and difficulty having getting things to grow. So the proposal on this one is to, here you see two beds, one up by that gate, so the entry point of that overland flow coming from the front is about, they said 100, I believe that's 170 foot, now I have it in reverse, 170 square foot conservation landscaping here. And then there's additional flow from the house and also the remainder of the overland flow continuing on through the property to this lower portion. And that is 156 square feet. So the total cost of the project is $49.75 and they are requesting a $3,500 cost share for that. I really appreciated the designer is working to mimic how woodland flow works, I believe, and part of the instructions in the estimate are to provide small swales and pockets for the water to flow through in a, rather than creating a smooth surface like many landscapers do. This proposal actually says let's try and mimic the woodland conditions where there's kind of ripples and spots, low spots, and trying to work the land back to more of a natural state. The coverage looks pretty good. They've got a lot of sedge and perennials. I believe we have 3 trays of plugs and then 11 larger shrubs here. If you have any questions or thoughts on this one.
So Judy, it looks like they're concentrating the shrubby plantings up towards the area that along the fence line.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then you mentioned grading, or at least creating some topographic relief for water flow. In that area that's closer to the shed, is that going to interfere with root zones of the trees at all?
So thanks for bringing that up. The area is the first area where they're actually recommending to do that work where there aren't trees. Here specifically says no till, no disturbance, and interplant among the roots with more plugs, smaller container plants.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Sorry, I have work going on in my house right now, so I'm muting as much as possible.
That's always fun.
Any other questions?
I'll be really curious to see how this one turns out. I think it's, there's a lot of interesting features that they're talking about putting in here. And I think that these are oftentimes typical areas where there are concerns, with poor vegetative growth and things like that, where there may be, challenges, especially along slope like that too. So you mentioned, Judy, that some of the concerns were the steep slope and shady conditions. Was it just poor vegetative cover in this area?
I believe that's right. Right. That they do have a flow path coming through, and this area in front is steeper. It looks from mapping like it could be as much as 20% slope up here. So I think the water gets a pretty good start down the slope, but it does level out back here. And I think gives an opportunity for vegetation to manage it. I'm not sure if they have plans for the front. Willie,
If I may jump in, this one side that I assessed, and yes, they have some slope. It's more long slope than steep slope, and the soil type is one that erodes, and they have a lot of trees that are not. Yeah, a lot of trees provide some canopy. Significant amount of runoff from the roof of the house and neighbors, etc., come and go in that northern path towards the back. So bare soils is a condition they have to work with because of the shade. And I'm hoping whatever this landscape person does would help to slow down the water before it gets to the rest of the backyard. One of my recommendations to them was, which this problem doesn't do, is to build a dry creek bed through to the backyard and have the downspout, which is a significant contributor to the runoff, into that channel and allow it to just be confined and go away. So all the runoff will just soak in.
So the landscaping plan was actually done by a landscaper?
yes.
And have you talked with that landscaper, Willie?
I haven't spoken with the landscaper, no.
So since the dry creek bed would not be cost shareable under VCAP, they could well be planning to do that outside of the of this application. And
I have the
find that
feeling.
out.
I have the feeling they want to do that too, because when I spoke with the lady, she was like, "Oh yeah, okay, well, yeah." But I made it clear that this cost share won't be taking care of it, and that's just addition to what would ensure that you minimize the erosion.
All right. Would you like me to move on to the next?
I have a quick question just to kind of clarify for my own knowledge. Normally, we deal with the homeowner. That's right. Staff deals with the homeowner, Judy and Willie.
My experience has been
do you
it
talk
varies.
with the designer? Who typically presents the plan to you all?
So I think it varies with each project,
Okay.
the whole spectrum. So this designer, she actually is the same designer for this project and then the next one. And I have been in contact with her directly. And this project actually came through, I had not visited the site. Willie did the site visit, but it looked pretty much pulled together and what we would expect under the program. So this one seemed very, meet the criteria of the program and in good shape. So I haven't spoken to either the homeowner or the designer for this particular application.
Okay. No, that was just for my own knowledge if we talk to both or whatever. Okay. All right.
Adria, just to follow up, I mean, a lot of times there is quite a bit of communication that happens between staff and the property owner, especially early on as they're trying to identify, and kind of narrow down what their project might be. And then when they do hire a landscape professional, if they choose to go that route and hire a landscape professional, oftentimes there's a lot of questions and conversation that ends up happening among the three parties as well, just in regards to making sure that there's clarification. But I think it is important, and I know that our team does this, that with any communication with the landscape professionals, that information gets back to the property owner as well, since they are ultimately the ones that are responsible for the project into the long term. So it's a really, really important conversation and inclusion of the property owner in the dialogue.
Yeah, and I would say
Okay.
this one is kind of unusual in that I do think the designer is pretty, seems to be meeting the criteria of VCAP really well. And of course that varies depending on how much experience the landscape designer has with VCAP or other programs like it. And certainly what we want to see is that applications come in really addressing the checklist that we provide them and providing all the information. So I thought this was strong in that particular category as well.
Okay. Sounds good. I appreciate it. All right.
Sure.
Next
Now
plan.
the next one, the next one is different. This is the one you saw last month. And so this one has actually involved a lot with the homeowner and the designer, all of us in conversation. But I think we really come to a great solution. I hope you all think so as well, and that it addresses some of the concerns or all of the concerns that were brought up last month. So overall, I just wanted to actually locate this a little more since we didn't talk about it. It's right on the border of Arlington County in the Franklin Farm area of McLean. So here's the property again as a reminder. Has a lot of flow coming through the property from some redevelopment to the rear and north. As you can see in photo C, taken from up the street, you see the corner of one of the new houses next door, and then you can see the roof of the house, the Cameron's house. And so this comes into play with the redesign that the designer submitted. So clearly, photo B, there's a lot of water that's causing difficulties with vegetation in the rear. And as you all saw before, there's just a lot of water coming through in that along the rear line and corner and off the property to the south. So what we have done is divided the application into two applications. And the first is the rain garden, which is actually is located so that it will take the runoff from these two roofs, which currently sheet flows off the roof and down along the edge of the property line here. As you can see, the property next door is much higher in elevation with the regrading for the new house. So this water is really kind of channeled and then spreads out down the back of the yard here. There's some flow coming off their property. It's not clear. This house's downspouts are buried, and undoubtedly there is some amount of stormwater management, but it was not clear where that water is coming through. But there is this drainage area visible through the landscape of the property, so it could be coming back through here. So the that's the last month's design. I can see if I can bring up the other one. The rain garden is located in this area. It is 120 square feet, very much similar to the one that they proposed last month. Really, the difference is that they are actually designing it for 600 square feet of roof runoff and then about 700 square feet of the flow from this area on the property. There's also a small shed on the back of the property that doesn't show up here, right here, and that is included in the impervious calculations for that rain garden. The amounts there that I show on that on this are the, it's probably on the Z drive. I apologize. That is the old one. The current rain garden application, they are requesting the $3,500. The rain garden total is $5,213.64. So if you have questions, I can see if I can get that one up for you to look at.
Judy, I've got it on my computer if you want me to pull it up.
That would be awesome. Thank you, Dan.
Okay, let me see if I can get my sharing going.
So the ratio of the treatable area to the actual rain garden is about 10-1. And so they would have to have roughly 10 inches of ponding depth in order to accommodate the 1 inch rain.
She is
Is that accurate?
including, she is including amended soil media in her design, so that it does actually include some ponding in the, or some capacity in the lower soil media.
Judy, I think I've got the new one up if people can see it.
Great. So it is, the impervious area is about 800 square feet. The impervious area is coming from this shed that you see in the middle, and it's heavily planted with perennials and sedges, and a few anchoring shrubs. Any other questions on this one?
How much of a contribution would you say the neighboring infill house is contributing?
It is hard to assess, without actually going into the engineering of those properties. And certainly anecdotally, the feelings on the ground are that they are, that it has changed the water flow a great deal, and they are experiencing a lot more. The house behind them has a very long driveway, but looking on site, it is actually sloped to the other side. So we don't have any, the contributing drainage area of that hillside is pretty huge. I mean, you could, not just new houses, but the older as well, could be, I believe, about a half an acre water coming through there. And
Charles, I'd be interested in Charles' opinion about, land development services must have permitted the new house with some level of water control, and the question of whether it's actually occurring, and why, an existing house should be trying to deal with not only their own ponding issues, but increased ponding from neighboring houses. Because you see it quite a bit. I've had lots of people indicate to me that, my backyard didn't look like that before the neighboring house was built.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they should have, Chris, I agree with you. If it's a new house, it should have some form of detention to at least treat the additional impervious area. And then they should have, there's the issue of whether or not they're required to do reduction because it's a residential under 1 acre. If there's some portion of the runoff they didn't have to treat. So maybe there was existing, and or whether or not what they built is performing as designed.
Yeah, and where that downspout buried piping goes.
And it could be they're over detaining in one spot in order to let it go another spot, you know?
Yeah. But I wonder how many times we're going to get in a situation trying to use VCAP to correct deficiencies on tear down type of homes.
Well, just to let you guys know, there was a presentation last week to the Mount Vernon Coalition of Civic Associations that Laura participated in. And they are hot on this issue of infill and runoff. And the LDS Matthew Hansen quoted that this one area, I think there were 69 infill lots in this one area of Mount Vernon district. That's significant. It wasn't a huge geographic area. So you're right, Chris. This issue is only going to get worse. And I know LDS is trying to address it, but there's a lot of latent impacts.
Yeah, I went down there with representatives from Supervisor Lusk and Stork's office, and it's an impossible situation because they don't have any way to, drain something off. Everything's flat and the infrastructure is old and not adequate for the larger impervious surfaces.
Or it's not there. And that's another challenge, I think, within some of these areas. And one of the reasons that VCAP is important in a lot of those areas is because we're not going to necessarily be able to provide the same kind of level of relief that some of the folks that are experiencing very, very significant flooding in those areas. And the pictures, excuse me, that were shared at that meeting are devastating. They're devastating. But a VCAP project isn't going to necessarily fix that because we're focused on water quality as opposed to volume control. And so there's a lot of conversations that are certainly happening at the county level to try to fix this gap in services and also recognize that there may be a need for enhanced attention on a lot of these infill sites. But it's not just the rooftop, it's the grading, it's the way that water, it changes, changes direction as part of the overall site development process. That also needs to be taken into consideration. What we're relieved about is that VCAP can provide some assistance to those that are maybe experiencing issues due to infill. And one of the things that I want to just convey is that we're not trying to necessarily solve other people's problems, but we're trying to solve the issue that the property owner has on their site. And that's an important consideration. And we can be part of those larger conversations about whether or not the detention requirements on infill developments is adequate, to avoid situations like this. I think this is, I know, going to sound a little kind of sugary, but one of our goals should be that we're not having to necessarily put VCAP projects in areas that where infill developments are taking place and where there should be, good quantity control and quality controls installed. But there's some lessons being learned, and certainly some folks that are open to changing things, but it's going to take a little time. But I want to just again convey that when a property owner calls us, whether it's for residential technical assistance or what we call green sheets, or for VCAP, we're helping that property owner do what they can to address the drainage issues on their specific property. And again, we can take those larger conversations, elsewhere.
Yeah, and I think too, this is an example of where the homeowner has worked with the property developer to the rear and contacted the county. And I think everybody is doing, in a sense, what they can. I think the developer behind the property, or the owner there, has helped with drainage across the driveway easement that runs along. On this diagram, it would be where the plant list is. There's a gravel driveway there, and water is sheet flowing over that into the next property. So they are, and the next property has got even more serious issues, really, of inundation over in Arlington County. So it is a complex group of folks involved. But I think one thing that I see that VCAP and going through this process has done for the homeowner is actually taken some ownership of it. The rain garden is not addressing new development flow really, although that is a question, there is a question of that undergrounded downspout, as you pointed out, because likely that was, part of a stormwater management plan that was engineered for that property. But they are looking at, okay, yeah, our roof is actually kind of big and it's flowing, water is running right off of that roof into our yard. And that's been happening, for a long time, and we can address that with this rain garden. So, I think they are seeing this as a way to address some of the contributing factors. And they're also, I should point out that they're doing other work outside of VCAP on their property to try and manage the water issues, both in the front yard and along the side. Really, there are 3 other little projects that they're taking on, but these are the 2 VCAP. And I think they are responding to this committee's concerns about, let's try and plant this up as much as you can. That's really what is going to be the best tool in the toolbox from our perspective, is really planting that back area. The amount shown for the conservation landscape, which you can see on here, which is the other application, was basically what their budget could allow at this point with everything else going on. So it's a good start. They're going to have a lot of plants to work with, spread them out, manage their bamboo issue as they go forward. So I think the homeowner is very engaged, and I think it's altogether, been a very positive experience for them to this point.
Gee, I really appreciate the fact that they adapted to the comments, the feedback. That's wonderful. And also the fact that, I think your points are really well taken, and they're actually being proactive not only to address their problem, but they're going to have a positive impact on their downstream property owner, the neighbor to the other side. And the other thing is interesting, Adria, your comment earlier about who are we talking to. It seems that this designer has discovered VCAP. They're pretty effective at putting in appropriately sized projects that kind of meet a sweet spot to address both the site concerns and to fit within the program constraints. So I think it's pretty admirable. I think it's nice that it is a good response by this designer, and it's a good effort.
Thanks.
I agree with you, Charles. And, another thing that is wonderful about VCAP is that neighbors talk. And so they see that your yard is not puddling, or they see something different going on. You're able to capture the water. And so then the fever catches on, and neighbors start to do projects as well. And that's what we're hoping. And that's part of what the education piece of VCAP is too. So I really appreciate it. And I'm glad that they were able to address some of our concerns. Thanks, Judy. Do you have any other additional plans? I don't think we have concerns with this plans now that they've made these adjustments. Does anyone else from the board have concerns, John or Chris?
No, I think the improvement is very welcome, and
Yep.
everything that Charles and you and Laura have said is true.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I think we can turn to the reimbursements. If Dan, you want to switch over to that
Sure.
slide deck, that'd be great. Thank you for stepping in the breach there.
Sure, no problem. Hold on 1 second. Let me just make sure I've got the right things pulled up. Sorry, my computer is being a little slow right now. There we go.
Boy, I checked my rain gauge this morning, and oof, I didn't think we were going to get a lot of rain out of that storm, but we got a lot. I don't know about you all. We got at least 2 inches, I'm thinking.
It was intense.
Yeah.
Not too far from you. It was.
I just looked, and with your mention, 1 3/4 inches, and it was empty yesterday afternoon.
Yeah.
We also had a lot of limbs down.
We did
lost
not have very
power.
much wind, and that was funny.
Jude, did you lose power too?
Briefly.
We didn't. We didn't, though. It felt a little bit like that derecho, the June derecho. It's like, are we going to have that again?
Yeah.
It didn't hit quite that hard.
No,
Hey.
but the wind was wicked.
Hey, Chris, how was Governor's Run flowing into the lake?
The road was not overflowed at all. The special project guys, Josh with VDOT did a really good job out there. He's a good guy. I assume you know
Not met him, but I'm glad to hear it. I just wonder if it was muddy flowing into the lake.
him. Oh, it's not brick red. It's not clear anymore, but it's better than a storm like that normally would have been. But the road wasn't overflowing, which is a major thing. So those new culverts worked.
Great.
Right. Dan, you got it up.
I got it up. So we've got a lot of reimbursement requests, 11 total. And the reason for it is these are actually old projects. These were approved in fiscal year 2020. So most of these were approved over a year ago or close to a year ago. And they had until June to finish up their construction. So there was sort of a mad rush of these outstanding projects to get everything finished and installed before the state's deadline of June 1st. And we are lucky that they all made it. Some just by the skin of their teeth, but they all made it. So these are ones that you probably haven't seen in a while, since we would have approved these in early 2020 through mid 2020, usually kind of the early days of the pandemic, if you will. And that was also one of the reasons why some of these were delayed. The pandemic hit and everything kind of ground to a halt for a few months there, including construction. But good news is they all got into the ground and they all made it in time. My computer doesn't want to move forward. There we go. All right, so our first one is contract number 2021-18. This is the Naheed Conservation Landscaping Project. It's in the Accotink Creek watershed. You see that little green star? That's the location of Miss Naheed's house. She is in Fairfax County, but she's about a block away from the Fairfax city line. So her property is just east of the Fairfax city border on Pickett Road. And she lives in kind of a pie-shaped wedge property that is very, very steep. So the backyard slopes down to the front of the house, which continues sloping down to the street frontage. And she has two VDOT curb gutters in front of her house, one on each corner of her property. So anything flowing off of her property quickly gets down into the street and then off into the storm drain system and then into Accotink Creek. So because of the slope and the conveyance of stormwater right there, she was a pretty good candidate for VCAP. And she actually has two projects on her property, but we'll start with the conservation landscaping one. And that was going to be on the right side of her property on the steeper slope. It's about a 25% grade there. The existing conditions before the project were grass, and it was fairly patchy. There was clear signs of erosion and poor grass growth. You can see her house there up at the top of the hill on the left. She had one downspout that was flowing down through here as well too. And she wanted to remove this grass and replant it with something a little more sturdy, if you will. And she's a fan of native plants, so she wanted to do it all native. And this is what it looks like now. Its project is approximately 400 square feet. She originally had proposed putting in 55 plants. She actually upped that and went to 80. And that's just the new plants. She actually had her contractor dig out some of her existing plants from around the property and transplant them in as well too. So the total, I don't know the exact total, but there's 80 new plants and then about 10 or 15 transplants within this conservation landscaping area. And you notice she does have a dry creek bed in there as well too. That was not cost shared through VCAP. It's not an eligible cost, but I think it is quite helpful for kind of channeling the harshest flows, if you will, the most concentrated flows, and preventing erosion within that newly mulched conservation landscaping area. This is a good picture on the right, and it kind of gives you a good sense of the slope here. It is a very highly sloped property. And this is the view from uphill, looking down towards the roadway. It's kind of a large teardrop shape landscaping project. And the total cost for this was $4,943.80, and she's asking for $3,216 in cost share. You'll notice that's a little bit below our cap of $3,500, which you would normally be eligible for, and that's because the cost of this dry creek bed is not a reimbursable cost. So Even though the total costs are fairly high and would have qualified her for $3,500, we subtracted the cost of the Dry Creek bed and just included the cost of the planting and mulch and soil amendments. So $3,216 in cost share for the Naheed Conservation Landscaping Project. Any questions on this one?
And just out of interest, where
Sure.
does the Dry Creek bed end? Or how does it end?
It just ends. I'll go back. So you can see it's about 3 or 4 feet uphill of the edge of the mulch. It does have a little bit of a bowl shape at the end, almost like a mini plunge pool. It'd be interesting to talk to her after the heavy rains we've had over the last week to see if it's still working. But it had rained quite a bit 2 days before I got there for the inspection, and things looked good. It didn't look like the mulch was blowing out, so I'm hoping it's holding well.
Okay, just out of interest.
Sure. Any other questions? I will move on to Miss Naheed's other project, which is a rain garden, and this one is on the opposite side of her property, over by her driveway. And here, the rain garden itself is actually located in a bit of a flatter part of the property, but she does have some very steep slopes, mostly from the neighbor's house, leaning down into it, as well as a good portion of her backyard. 2 of her downspouts also flow towards this rain garden, as does quite a bit of runoff from her driveway. So the erosion was not so bad here. Her issue was more the volume of stormwater. She was saying that there's a good couple of inches that flow down onto her driveway and out into the roadway during a heavy storm, and she was hoping to capture and absorb some of that. This area to the left of the driveway is where she was going to put that rain garden. So here's the before image, and you can see the neighbor's house sitting quite a bit higher up on the left side there, which sends a lot of runoff down to this rain garden as well too. And here is the after. So it's a little bit of an interesting design. Rather than mulching the ponding depth, they actually mulched it. That's the right term, mulch. They covered it with river rock, which I think actually looks pretty nice. And they kind of concentrated the plantings inside the ponding area within just one sort of square or circle right in the middle there. And then most of the plantings are actually up on the berm and along the edges of the rain garden, which is fine by me. Just unusual design, but I don't see any issues with it. In fact, I think with the speed of the runoff that might come down this hill, it could be nice to have that river rock on the surface to prevent a little bit of erosion and blowout during big storms. It's a fairly long dry creek bed that leads down into the rain garden. It goes to the back corner of her house, and there the contractors connected her rear downspout directly into the dry creek bed, and they also installed this channel drain, which takes in some of the surface runoff that's coming from her backyard. And that goes down into the same pipe that is draining out this downspout. And they installed this 6x6 as well too, to sort of create a little barrier to force water down into that channel drain. In addition, they installed one other channel drain along the edge of her driveway. So this is capturing runoff from her front driveway, which then enters a short corrugated pipe, only about 4 or 5 feet long, and then drains down into the dry creek bed, which is just down. You can just start seeing the gravel right here at the bottom left corner of this picture. There's a nice overall view of the project with the dry creek bed coming down the hillside and spilling into that rain garden in the front yard. I like this project too because it is quite visible for the neighborhood. The landscaping project, people may not know that that's there for both beauty but also for water quality. This one is clearly a structural thing. So hopefully she gets some good questions about it and spread the word. The total cost of this project was $6,401.50, and therefore she's eligible for the maximum $3,500 in VCAP cost share. The square footage of the rain garden was a little bit smaller than we expected, but I ran the numbers and it is capturing the volume that it was intended to, so I don't have any issues with that slight reduction in size. Any questions for Ms. Naheed's rain garden?
Not a question, but just a statement. This is just a really interesting and innovative design to bring the water to the front yard. And of course, it's naturally sloped here anyway, but I had the opportunity to go out and visit this site back in the fall of 2019. And there are some unique features here. She's got, it may be a little bit difficult to see from this particular picture, but there are a large number of large trees right here along that side that really made it very constrained in terms of the site conditions. And she has, the water is flowing right toward the house. So I think the fact that she's capturing a lot of that runoff from her downspouts is really great, and treating a lot of the runoff that was actually impacting the usability in this of her driveway as well, and the steps along the side of her home. She seems like a very enthusiastic, very enthusiastic about the use of natives, and she was that way back in 2019. And I think that this could be a great site for a potential sustainable garden tour location and video in the future as well.
Agreed. All right, I'll move on to the next one then. This is the Long Conservation Landscaping. This is a project in the city of Alexandria. Ms. Long lives in northern Alexandria, pretty close to the Arlington County border and very close to 4 Mile Run, and she's in the 4 Mile Run watershed. So here's a zoom in of her property. Her landscaping is actually out in the front, so while she has a decent slope in the backyard, the front yard is actually quite flat. And she, just like Ms. Naheed, is very much into native landscaping. They bought this house just a few years ago and want to completely redo the front yard and change it into sort of a native plant showcase, if you will. This is what it looked like before. They had a big circular driveway in the front, and otherwise it was mostly just kind of patchy turf grass. And here's what it looks like now. So this was taken just after installation, so you can still see that, the mulch, not the mulch, the straw is down to control things. The plants haven't grown very much, but so there's not that much to see since the plants are still very small, but they did have a planting plan that is very dense. And this project actually increased in size as well, too. They also have a couple mulch walking paths throughout, which you can see here if you look at my cursor and where that blue bin is. So there's 2 mulched walking paths that go through the property, through the landscaping. Here's the other one here. The project actually increased in size a little bit. They were approved for a 724 square foot landscaping project. They upped it to 840 square feet, which of course we have no problem with if you want to build something bigger. And like I said, it is a very dense planting. They put in 456 total plants, but because they're plugs and very small, it's not that easy to see them. It was an interesting planting plan. The designer put in kind of an evenly spaced background grid of Pennsylvania sedge and purple lovegrass, and then interspersed throughout that grid, they put in larger plants to create kind of showy drifts. Here's another picture. You'll notice there is a lot of bare soil here. This is another project they're about to break ground on. They're actually doing more conservation landscaping, but this time not with any VCAP cost share. They're turning what was the rest of the front yard into conservation landscaping, but they delayed that just a little bit because they're having some small renovation work done on a corner of their property, and they're going to use this area as the access path to allow the construction workers to get in and install new windows and new doors and such. And once that construction work is done, they're going to stabilize the rest of the front yard as an additional conservation landscaping project. But again, that's not going to be a VCAP project. They've already maxed out on their cost share. So that highlighted area there shows the bare area that will soon be in addition to this landscaping. And it's being done with the same designer, so it'll tie in nicely with the aesthetics of the existing VCAP cost share program project. The total cost here is fairly high, $8,820, which means they are eligible for the maximum $3,500 in VCAP cost share. Just a nice photo showing kind of an overview of the entire project with the mulching, the mulch paths, the planted areas, and then the bare area in the back, which is going to be the next phase of this conservation landscaping. Any questions about Ms. Long's conservation landscaping project?
Yeah, Dan, this is Jerry.
Yes.
All the plants are plugs or small container plants?
Yes.
I don't see any large, no 2-inch diameter trees or anything like that, right?
No, it's all yeah, it's all ground cover or plugs, which will eventually become larger plants, but can't really see that right now. So there's a lot of plants in there. It's just a little hard to see because they're only about 2 or 3 inches tall at this
So
point.
I like that approach better. If time will reduce the cost, I'm all for it.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think once this grows up, it'll be pretty much a sea of green with the amount of plants that they put in the density.
Thanks.
Dan, it's nice to get an extra return on our investment with the additional work they're doing. So that's nice.
Agreed. And these folks are definitely into conservation because they actually have another project, which I'll talk about now. I kind of buried the lead a little bit. And if you saw some of the older photos, you actually saw some of this other project. But they did a porous paving project as well. So again, this is the same property, Miss Long's property in Alexandria. Here's another shot of what things looked like before. So they actually had a circular driveway. This was not a project that I had gone to before. This was one of Christina's last ones before she left. And when she said there was a circular driveway, I was thinking a semicircle, but it actually was a full circle. So if you kind of see the picture on the left there, I tried to outline where that asphalt was, and it went all the way around. So it was a full 360 degrees of asphalt in the front yard there. And they wanted to get rid of that and replace it with porous paving. And that kind of simplifies the project a little bit. There's actually more done. So if you look at what it is now, they've created a fairly large 884 square foot permeable paving driveway, but the original footprint of the asphalt driveway was a little over 1,600 square feet. And that remaining 800 square feet, that's actually become part of the conservation landscaping we just looked at over in this area. And the rest of it is going to become the next phase of the conservation landscaping. So they actually have an additional 800 square feet of impervious surface that they removed and are turning into porous permeable landscaping. So while they're only getting cost share for the permeable paving they put in, I just did want to note that this is actually a little bit of a larger project than it looks like originally. The permeable paving itself looks quite beautiful. It's very nicely done. I checked the infiltration rates. They were blazingly fast, so it seems to be working quite well. And it you know, aesthetically speaking, it looks very nice. They actually made a little bit of a larger project than they were originally approved for, which again is not a problem from our perspective. The square footage is the same. 884 square feet is what they had originally intended, and that's what they installed. But they put in a slightly deeper layer of gravel underneath than what their original plan was approved for. And as a result, they're storing a little bit more volume of runoff than what they were originally approved for. So they took 2 additional downspouts from the rear yard, buried them and routed them up to spill directly into the gravel layer. So now I believe there's 5 total downspouts routed to the permeable paver, and that increased the impervious surface, the rooftop surface draining here by about 50 square feet. So they weren't big downspouts, but it is an additional 50 square feet of roof that's now draining into this permeable paving system. This was an expensive project, as you might imagine, both the removal and the replacement with permeable paving. The total cost was $31,570. And for that 884 square feet of new permeable paving, they are eligible for $4,047 in VCAP cost share. Any questions on Miss Long's porous paving project?
I love it.
Yeah.
I also love that they dug deeper and put in more gravel so that they are ready for that larger capacity storm like we were just talking about with yesterday evening. Thanks, Dan. This is real nice.
Is there anything we can learn from that as far as, you know, permeability rates, costs per square foot, construction techniques?
I'm not sure. I mean, if you look at the total cost of them, it was quite high.
Yeah.
So I think permeable paving will be a project that people are interested in, but you really have to have the budget to make it happen because right now our cost share rates are fairly low compared to the total cost of the project. So
yeah.
something like this is quite beautiful, but it's a big chunk of change from the homeowner to make something like this happen. I'm sure that $4,047 will be helpful, but it certainly doesn't cover, it's just a small portion of the total cost of a project like this.
Was there something about the construction technique, maybe the depth, that contributed to your blazingly fast data?
It could have been. I'm not sure. It was a fairly dry day when I went there and hadn't rained much, so I think it's more maintenance. As long as you can keep those cracks between the pavers open and not clogged with sediment and organic matter, you can maintain a pretty good infiltration rate. So probably more the maintenance side than the construction side or design side. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
I'm sorry, Dan, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was just going to say, when we worked with MSMD on the porous paver assessments, one of the things that we found is that most porous paver projects have pretty lightning fast infiltration rates, and that's a good thing. We want to avoid significant puddling in these on these facilities. So I just wanted to kind of make that point that, by comparison to a rain garden, these, I mean, they're an order of magnitude sometimes faster than some of the vegetated facilities. So really interesting project. I'd like to see the changes, and I just wanted to note, originally their cost estimate was about $26,500. So it's about $5,000 difference in order to go a little bit deeper for, based upon what they had originally estimated. But interesting, definitely interesting project, definitely not an inexpensive project. And this one will have a little bit more of that detention and capacity than the water quality benefit, for sure.
Hey, Laura, I did do a little bit of looking at permeable pavement and infiltration rates, and the industry does expect like an installation to be about 200 seconds to infiltrate 40 pounds of water is like their standard for, so they really, I mean, they are expecting a high rate and expecting that to last through 10 to 20 years with the proper maintenance. So it really is, like you say, an order of magnitude very different from what we're used to with soils or even with rain gardens.
Just one comment on that, though. I think, I'm not sure, is it actual infiltration or just the fact that you have a 40% void space in your gravel layers. Basically, the water's disappearing into your storage area.
That's
and
correct.
not necessarily infiltrating any faster. It's just being captured in the storage area quickly.
Yes, that's right. That is accurate. It's how quickly it disappears off the surface, not how quickly it goes into the ground, for sure. Yep.
Yeah, that's fair assessment for sure.
So Dan, was there an under drain in this system?
I don't know. I'd have to look at the original design.
Looks really impressive, though.
I would imagine, given the slope, the under drain would be difficult, probably because you'd have to tie into the VDOT right away. I would imagine, given the slope, there's not. That essentially it's running through that gravel void space, and it could eventually potentially daylight at the bottom after time, but the rate of time of concentration would be so slow because it's going to that gravel void space. But that is cool, very cool.
All right. Move on to the next one. This is the Zifra's Bioretention Project. They are in the Accoting Creek watershed. Their house is located just north of Interstate 66 and just east of Germantown Road. So not too far from our office, and also very close to the border with Fairfax City. So this is another good, we were talking about infill. This is another good example of sort of a victim of infill. So this is their property here. They are on a very sloped property. The property to their left sits higher up. The property to their right sits lower down. So the slope is running in this direction. This old house here is no longer. It was knocked down about 2 or 3 years ago and replaced by a much larger house that sits much closer to the roadway. And as a result, the Zifras were getting a significant increase in stormwater runoff going through their property. And it was causing some real problems for them, both just in terms of the volume and usability of the backyard, and also erosion as well too. And because of the large size of this new house that was put in just uphill of them, they needed something fairly large to capture that 1-inch rainfall. So they decided to put in a full bioretention along their western property line to try and grab that runoff from the newly developed property just uphill of them. This is a before photo, I think a pretty good example of sort of the problems they were seeing. You can see it is taken during a pretty intense storm. So this is about the worst you'll see it, but they do have this river of runoff that goes passing through their property. This was taken down next to their shed, which is right along their fence line with their lower hill or the downhill property owner. So their problems are also shared by other property owners just downhill of them. This is the after photo. So this is their new bioretention. And there you can see the new house just on the other side of their fence. So you can imagine something that big creates quite a bit of runoff. This project actually changed quite a bit. It was always intended to be a bioretention, but the design changed quite a bit from concept and the approved concept to the actual built project, the as-built project. But I think those changes are fine because for the most part, they actually made the project bigger. Originally, they were going to do one large cell bioretention. Now they're doing 2, so it's a little hard to see, so I tried to label it. But the first cell is up here, kind of in the top right part of the property. So runoff from the neighbor's property flows under the fence where you see this gravel, fills into cell number 1. Cell number 1 will then fill up and then spill over through this gravel overflow into cell number 2, which then fills up and spills out of this gravel overflow. So an interesting design. One of the reasons they had to do that, it doesn't show it so much here, but it's a fairly sloped property. And if they did one cell, it would have created a really large kind of retaining wall almost on the downhill side to hold back all that water. So breaking it up into 2 cells worked a little bit better. Here's another view of it. This is looking at the second cell as well. So the first cell is again up here, kind of in the top left this time. And this is also showing the overflow of the second cell. So when the second cell fills up, it overflows over this little rock outlet, kind of skirts around this rock wall and goes into this dry creek bed. And here's the downhill view of that dry creek bed. So the dry creek bed extends across the entire yard, and they've got some nice little walking footbridges over top of it. And it ends very close to their shed, which is again where this original photo of the runoff was taken. So the dry creek bed comes all the way down to this location here. The total cost of this project was $11,700. Because it's a bioretention, they're qualified for 75% cost share up to $10,000. So they get a good chunk of cost share at $8,775, which is quite a bit. But I'll give you a few numbers. So their original project, the bioretention, was supposed to be a 280 square foot footprint. They actually increased that to 390 square feet. It was supposed to have a ponding depth of 6 inches. They increased it to 9 inches. And with those 2 changes, they have increased their water storage from an originally approved 245 cubic feet to 439 cubic feet. So this is a large volume project. This is really storing a lot of runoff. Surprisingly, with these changes, they still managed to keep the cost the same. So I'm not exactly sure how that happened, but good for them. So anyway, total cost $11,700, and they qualify for $8,775 in cost share. And I inspected this project about 2 days after a heavy rainstorm. There was a little bit of mulch wash off here and there, which the designer said she could handle and fix without much issue. And Mr. Zifra said that during that rainstorm, which was close to an inch, he didn't see any runoff come out of the bioretention. So it did capture the volume that it was intended to. And he said it drained out within a couple of hours. So he was pretty happy with that. Any questions?
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to open it up to questions.
What percentage of their ponding is above ground, essentially, by building up on that side slope, by going vertical versus digging deeper?
I'm not exactly sure. So the ponding surface of the rain garden is the original soil layer, But I think what they did is they kind of terraced in a way. So they cut back a bit on the uphill side and then spread out soil on the downhill side and mixed in compost. So it's
Okay.
it's the native soil. So it's kind of like a stair stepping, if you will. But you can tell from the size of those berms that they did have to dig up quite a bit. Another reason
So a
for
lot of
that
that,
is
okay.
this, it was actually shallow bedrock, and this is an area of the county with potential asbestos containing bedrock. So they were very careful to build higher rather than do much extensive digging. When they consulted with
Okay.
me and it did some, we did some soil cores before they started just so we could see where that bedrock was. So that's one of the reasons that it looks as tall as it does.
Okay.
There was a lot of
That's cool.
background complications. This was a tough project, but I think they made it work well.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Dan.
All right.
Do you have any
So
others, Dan?
Yes, we do. So the Ziffers
Okay,
actually have two projects. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Can I just interrupt 1 second? Everyone, we're getting close to the 12 o'clock mark, and we probably have a few more slides here with Dan, and then additionally, we have some slides with Judy regarding policies for VCAP that we might go over by about a half an hour. So if anyone needs to dip off or leave us, please, you know, feel free. We're just going to go over a little bit longer. Additionally, next month I cannot attend. So, and before we have people starting to hop off, I wanted to mention that and see if I can if I can either give that assignment to Laura or to John to chair the meeting for next month.
That's fine, AJ. I would be happy to chair the meeting. I do just want to acknowledge, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more next week at the board meeting, but the governor's emergency order ends at the end of this month. So we will be needing to meet in person. And we do have the board, Fairfax County Park Authority boardroom available to us to host these meetings, host our TRC meetings into the longer term as well. So we will at least have a space where we can meet there. And I'm going to try to ensure that we still have a video option for those who would like to meet over or participate and listen in over video. So anyway, more information on that to come. I'm happy to step in unless anybody else has a urgent desire.
Well, I'm fine with that, Laura, if the other board members are.
I'm fine with it too. I'm not a board member, but I'm just a committee member.
No problem for me.
I will
Okay.
look forward
Just
to working with everybody in person.
Just a quick question, since this is not a meeting of your board, this is a committee meeting. Is it required that this be? So I guess what I'm getting to is, does it have to be an in-person meeting, or I think they're pretty productive remotely, and with the video materials and everything else, it makes sense and it's much more economical to not travel if we can avoid it. So just a thought.
I think we could say that about a lot of our meetings, but unfortunately, yes, because it is a committee of our board, even though it is not a board meeting by FOIA and open meeting requirements, we must continue to comply with those open meeting laws. So we do need to have an in-person component. I think the good news is by having these in the boardroom, we will be able to have a virtual option, and we may be a bit of the guinea pigs and trying to make sure that we figure out how that all operates so that there can be this bit of a hybrid approach. So for those who do still want to participate virtually, we should still have that option.
I hope we can make it work that way, Laura. That would be good.
We're working on it. So back to you, Dan.
All right. So the Ziffers have two projects. The other one, in addition to their bioretention, is conservation landscaping. So same property, just north of I-66, east of Germantown. This project is going to be on their downhill property line. And this, where the bioretention was capturing the water from the new house that was built uphill of them, this project really is capturing runoff from their own roof as well as from dispersed runoff from their lawn. So it's a long and thin conservation landscaping. They wanted to put it down at the bottom property line, both because obviously that's where the water flows, but they have a lot of extensive canopy cover down there and a lot of shade, so they were having a hard time getting their grass to grow. So it's a shot of some of their sparse grass growth down on the lower property edge. And this is what they have now. So to kind of pull it out, I put a circle around it as best I could. So it basically starts where you start seeing the green of the grass begin. That's the start of the conservation landscaping. And it goes to that little log wall that they created, which is just something that they did on their own as homeowners to kind of delineate the project and also slow down runoff just a little bit more. Again, this is almost all plugs that you can see some larger plants in the middle. So it doesn't look that impressive yet because they were just installed and they're not very big. But it is another fairly dense planting. They put in 209 plants. Again, probably about 95% of those are plugs with the exception of those few larger shrubby plants that you can see in the middle. And it looked quite good. It runs from basically the edge of their kind of the patio along their house to the very terminus of the dry creek bed. And this is the dry creek bed that drains out the bioretention project. So this is basically covering the remaining width of the yard that does not specifically drain the bioretention uphill. The square footage of this project was 400 square feet. Again, there was 209 plants installed. The total cost for the conservation landscaping was $9,900, and that makes them eligible for the maximum $3,500 of VCAP cost share. Any questions regarding this project?
I'm just going to make a comment. I'm really glad that they reduced turf more and came out further from the fence. And just to let you know, the Audubon and Home Program's goal for Audubon certified properties is to try to push towards the 70% native plant cover. So, you know, most of our lawns are like 10% or less, or most of our yards are like 10% or less native. But anyway, whenever they can reduce turf and pull it out, that's fantastic.
Great. Thanks, Charles. All right, I'll move quickly because I know we're running late. Project number 28, this is the Simpson Conservation Landscaping project. Mr. Simpson is located in the Poet Creek watershed. Not too far from where you live, John, I believe, at least a few miles away. He's on Draco Street. He has a fairly steeply sloped backyard, but then a fairly flat front yard. And his issue was he gets a lot of runoff, both direct runoff from his own property as well as runoff from his neighbors going through his backyard, flowing out on both sides of the house to his front yard, and then just sort of sitting there. So he had kind of a soggy front yard and an eroded backyard. And he wanted to do his best to fix it. So he was actually looking at 3 problem areas. The biggest one is on the southern property line along the steep slope next to his neighbor who's sending him a lot of runoff. And there's 2 other spots, one on the northern property line, sort of a steep slope where he is sending his runoff down to his neighbor with the pool to the north, as well as the front left part of his property where he had significant water ponding and a lot of sogginess. I didn't get a great before photo of this property. This is just taken from Google Maps, but you can kind of see the very bad patchy grass growth over here. This is the soggy part of his yard where the water just sits. And you can't quite see into his backyard because of the shrubs, but you can see the neighbor has a lot of bare soil in his yard by the fence line. And that's what Mr. Simpson's property looked like in the back too. Quite a bit of erosion and not very good grass or vegetative coverage. So for this first section of conservation landscaping on the right side of his property along his southern fence line, he put in a pretty intensive wire log terrace planting. And it actually ended up being a little bit larger than he originally had planned for. But he kept his costs down quite nicely. He originally got a bid that was a little bit over $10,000 to do all of this landscaping, not just this section, but the 2 on the other side as well too. And he got his costs down to just over $5,000 because he ended up sourcing all the material himself. So he got a lot of sweat equity out of this project and drove the cost down quite a bit. He also installed those wire logs himself and had his family help with some of the installation, although most of the plant installation was done by a professional landscaping company. But it looks very nice. He also added some erosion control matting, which you can see down here at the bottom, which was not in the original plan, but he tacked that on as well too. This is the other side of his back, the slope that leads down to his neighbor to the north, a slightly smaller conservation landscaping area, but one that looks quite nice. And he opted with a larger plant, so you can kind of see it's got a bigger pop to begin with. It's not plugged, so he didn't quite get the density that we saw in some of the other projects, but it does look quite nice because the plants are grown and you can see them very clearly for what they are. And then down in the front of his property, that's the area where he was getting water standing. And you can see in certain parts of the yard where he hasn't yet extended conservation landscaping. I'm not sure if he's going to expand this project or not. Just the grass growth is quite patchy. But here in the conservation landscaping area, you've got a nice layer of mulch down on the top, and the plants seem to be doing quite well. That's his dog, who I saw literally eat about 75 cicadas while we were there. So that was pretty amazing as well, too. So again, he really kept the costs down because he sourced all of his materials himself and did some of the installation work himself. So the total cost of this project, even though it was a 1,300 square foot footprint for all of those conservation landscaping areas combined, was only $5,850.98, and that makes him eligible for the maximum $3,500 in VCAP cost share. Any questions about Mr. Simpson's project? Okay, hearing none.
Dan, sorry, just a quick note. I wanted to just note that these are all 2020 projects. Just because we're recording this, Dan, I'm just wanted to note that the project code that you have up there should read 21-2020-028. So just a slight typo. It happens. We're in 2021, which is probably, it would happen to me all the time. But I just wanted to, again, make that acknowledgement that these would be 2020 projects.
That's correct. Sorry about that. So the last one for me is the Ayers Rain Garden, 2020-013. Mr. Ayers lives in the Sandy Run and Occoquan River watersheds, just a little south of Ox Road off Brimstone Lane. He lives off of a pipe stem, so there's his project with the green star. He wanted to put his rain garden down at kind of the crook of the driveway. So as a pipe stem, there's a long driveway that comes towards his property, and then it forks, and one tine of the fork goes off to his neighbor to the right, and then his driveway goes off to the left, and he wanted to install his rain garden kind of right in the crook of that fork. And this is the approximate location, and you can see the driveway wrapping around on both sides. Mr. Ayers' property is there to the left, his neighbor's there to the right. And this rain garden would receive mostly pervious surface runoff, so mostly runoff from his lawn, but also a little bit from the driveway itself. So it's got a pretty big drainage area, but most of it is pervious. And here's the after. So quite a beautiful project, but there was a problem with this one. So what I'm asking for now is conditional approval. Because I think this project needs a little bit of an upgrade. So while this looks great, this is supposed to be a rain garden, and you kind of see from the side here, there's really no ponding depth, which was surprising because Mr. Ayers really took great photos throughout the construction. And you can see early on in the construction, they definitely do have a bowl-shaped rain garden shape dug out. This was taken, the crew came in and dug, and then they had a heavy rain that night. And he said they came back the next day, drained it, and actually dug down another 6 to 9 inches and excavated out more soil. So they clearly had a very well-defined bowl shape. But then for whatever reason, when they came in to fill it, they did not maintain any ponding depth. Rather, they just filled the bowl all the way to the top and have it gently sloping down from top to bottom. So there's really no ponding depth there right now. However, they did put in a lot of other upgrades that were not called for in the original plan. So what looks like a dry creek bed running right down through the middle here is actually more of a dry well. So this gravel is not just on the surface, it actually extends all the way down to the bottom of that dugout rain garden bowl. So there's a couple feet of gravel there. They used 2 cubic yards of gravel. And the original design just called for them to dig out the rain garden and then till in compost to the native soil. But what they did was they actually brought in 4 cubic yards of rain garden soil. So they brought in a lot more material than what was originally called for. So when taking that into account, the storage held in that rain garden soil, as well as the pore spaces and storage held within this sort of dry creek bed, dry well kind of hybrid project here, They actually don't need as much storage on top. They don't need as much ponding on top as what was originally called for, since they're storing a lot more within that gravel and extra rain garden soil. But I still told them that they needed some, because I ran some rough numbers and they just weren't getting the storage volume. They weren't storing and capturing that 1-inch rainfall that VCAP requires. So rather than having them dig up this entire project and starting over, which is certainly not something that I wanted them to do, I asked them to put in basically 3 sort of curved check dams that would extend anywhere from 6 to 12 inches wider than this dry creek bed, dry well hybrid here. So they're going to put one down at the bottom, one sort of in the middle, and then one up at the top. And those check dams would sit 6 inches higher than the surface area of the rain garden. And then that would satisfy me that they're getting the proper ponding and the proper volume storage of runoff that they need and they were originally supposed to create with this rain garden. So the design ended up changing quite a bit. And I haven't been out there to inspect what they've built, but Mr. Ayers did actually send me an email over the weekend saying that they had started installing the check dam. So this is the first one that's getting put in, and it looks pretty good, but I still need to go out and inspect it to make sure that it's meeting those specs that I mentioned: 6 inches of height and 6 to 12 inches of overlap across the width of that dry creek bed on either side. I'm actually scheduled to go out there tomorrow morning to take a look. So what I'm asking for now is conditional approval to release the money. We did talk with the Virginia Association of Soil and Water Conservation Districts to make sure this was okay. Again, because they had this June deadline, we wanted to make sure that we got the money and were able to hold it until they got the issues with this project fixed. And I think as long as these check dams are looking good, I will be satisfied that this project is doing what it was originally intended to, even though the design has changed quite a bit. So again, asking for conditional approval, with the condition being I go out, I inspect it and say, yes, indeed, these 6 inch tall 3 rows of check dams have been installed as I asked. Now that's a little unusual, but are there any questions on this one?
When does the state committee meet? For
Well,
final
actually,
approval?
they have already approved for the cost share. They said to go ahead and request it, since we had to get the request in by June 1st.
Okay.
And that if there was an issue, we would hold the money on our end until that issue is resolved, and then we would release it on our end. So they have approved it. It's really up to us now at this point.
Okay. Well, we can hang tight with what you got going on here and wait to hear back and go with what you feel at our board meeting next week, if the board is okay with that.
I would
board
say
members.
my recommendation would be to, again, pending the inspection tomorrow, that when the board meets, assuming that I find that these 3 rows of check dams have been installed as I asked, then my recommendation would be for approval.
And this is Jerry. Do you have any insight into whether the contractor changes himself, or did the contractor change it after talking with the client? The client said, oh yeah, go do whatever you want to do.
At first, I thought it was the contractor, and to be honest, the contractor should know a little better. They've done quite a few VCAP projects before, but after meeting on site, it actually sounds like it was the homeowner who was a little confused and requested this design change to be put in. I wish the contractor had, said, well, we should really talk to the conservation district first to see if this is okay, because when I got out there, it was kind of blindsided me a little bit that they had this beautiful project, but it's not really a rain garden. It's not really what was approved. So I kind of talked with the contractor saying, yeah, it sounds like you were asked to do this by the homeowner. And obviously they did do a lot of upgrades as well too, which were not called for, but actually helped the project quite a bit. But I want to stress to this contractor and all contractors going forward, that if they're making changes to the approved design, they really should check with us first to make sure somebody doesn't get stuck with a problem project that we can't reimburse.
I'm afraid, this is going to set precedent, and I don't know how much the contractors talk with each other, but if they learn that we'll accommodate anything they want to do, where do we stand? I don't have a suggestion on what to do. It's concerning that part of the contract is the design, and they just said, forget it, we're not going to do that.
I think
it's wonderful you were able to step in and make it okay. But
I think what we need to emphasize with the homeowners going forward is that when they get their plan approved and before they start construction, we need to say, yes, you've been approved. What you have put, the bid that you have in that application that you sent to us is your official, that's what we expect to be built. And if
It's
there's
a
changes
contract.
to it, yeah, it's a contract.
It's a
And if there's
contract.
changes to that, you put your cost share at risk. So please be aware of that. And if, sometimes changes will happen. I think as long as they talk to us first and we can say, yeah, well, this still meets the spirit of what you're trying to do. You're still capturing that 1-inch rainfall. And
Right.
it's
That's
not
why
a big issue.
that's why a lot of construction projects require as-built drawings. We don't do that, but if there, like you say, if there are changes, I would have no problem putting our foot down and saying you've already taken care of it, but I would have had no problem putting our foot down and say, okay, we're not going to fund this because you didn't follow a contract. Okay, well, let's hope the rest of the industry doesn't take this as precedent.
Jerry and Adria, can I just chime in for a minute?
Sure, I saw your note that you need to
Picking up-
take off.
Well, at 12:30, picking up though on the point Jerry made, and it sounds as though with Dan's suggestions, this one might suffice. But let's just presume we had one of these that we approved conditionally like this, and they never did satisfy us. What would happen with the funds as far as the state association is concerned, since they've already approved them? Would we just give them back?
I would just give them back. Yes.
Okay.
And this was a little bit unusual since we were sort of up against the hard June 1st deadline. So that's why they said, just go ahead and put in the application and try and figure it out on your end, because if we had missed that deadline, then the funds would have disappeared altogether.
Understand. And it sounds like, Dan, you're confident that they're going to satisfy you.
I think so. The fact that they already have one in, and I asked, they only sent a photo of one, but I said, indeed, are there 3 lines of these check dams? And he said, yes, there's 3. So, I think for a couple $100 to put in these 3 check dams in order to release that $3,500, I'm not surprised that they went pretty quickly and did it.
So Dan, in line you're thinking with the check dams, which I think would theoretically provide the storage which we are looking for.
Mhm.
Do you think if those check dams are not actually below the surface level where there's increased infiltration in that dry well, it would provide the storage that you're looking for, or that we're looking for?
I think so. It's not the perfect solution, but I think it's a good practical solution and gets us to the storage volume that we need. Because like I mentioned, that dry creek bed is really a dry well. So we just need something to sort of be an impediment against the water and allow it to pool up behind so it can quickly soak down into that gravel below.
I was also going to note that I think actually our response to this is a message to the contracting community that we are paying attention and that we do expect performance, rather than we'll let them get away with substandard approach, because I think the contractor is like, oh, okay, they're looking at it and they're really analyzing it. Dan came through with some very specific criteria and analysis, and they've come up with a really good solution, I think, in terms of making it work. I think that, honestly, I think they just had more soil media than they planned on, and they filled it up too much. But it's hard to know reverse engineering what happened for sure.
I just want to mention, Jerry, that as soon as Dan and I had a conversation about this site as well, and I was prepared to step in and be the heavy if need be. And that was absolutely shared. I like the approach. And as Judy jumps into the discussion on policies, these are definitely some things to keep in mind, and in terms of reemphasizing the importance of what this is, which is a contract, and the importance of the communication with the district when changes may need to occur. And just as Judy was mentioning, real strength in us again going out and doing these inspections and saying, no, this isn't meeting, you know, what we had originally agreed to, and let's see what we can do to make some accommodations, you know, to the site. But if that's not going to be adequate enough, then, you know, just as Dan said, it does put their cost share at risk.
Is there any language in the paperwork that we do now that says follow the design or else? If we don't have it, do we need
If
it?
there's not, we need to review it, and maybe we need to put it in there as a policy review. And that's something that Judy's going to talk a little bit about coming up. I don't know if that addresses that, but we certainly can make sure that language is in there going forward, Jerry.
Yeah. Shouldn't have to say it, but
Yeah. Just like
Apparently
I've
do.
had, you know, people tell me, other contractors say, can you believe that staff person actually reached down and looked to see how that tree was planted and actually pushed the mulch away? Not the staff here with Soil and Water, but actually from Urban Forestry. Someone commented me, another contractor, and said, can you believe that? I said, well, we know how our industry and what kind of, you know, characters are out there, and they're honest people, follow the rules. And like Judy's saying, this individual probably just had extra soil and didn't realize what was going on, and maybe hoped that things would sink or whatnot. But, you know, they're making the adjustments, and I'm glad that Dan and Judy were able to make this into a nice design that's going to work for the homeowner and still meet the standards that we're looking for to do the job. So thank you, Dan and Judy.
And we'll need to meet the standards as we do inspections on it. So that's another part of this. Is
Absolutely.
we have 10 years to
In
see.
the upcoming years.
Yep.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens next year after some of these big storms, right, Judy?
Hey.
Hey, so all right, Dan, what else do you have?
All right, so just to wrap up the Ayers Rain Garden, so their total cost was $8,518.10. And again, conditionally, we like them to get approved for their $3,500 in cost share, depending on whether they correctly install those check dams. So I'll move on to the next. Judy, do you want me to drive while you describe, or I could also just go through it and throw any questions your way?
Sure. Why don't you keep going?
Okay, so the next couple ones
straightforward.
are ones that Judy inspected. So I don't know these as well. So if you have questions, we'll throw it over to Judy, but I'll just give you the broad strokes. So contract number 2020-15 is Fairlington Villages. This is a large condo complex that actually is within Arlington and Alexandria, but this portion was in the city of Alexandria, so it fell under the VCAP purview. They had a very steep slope coming down on community land, draining down to, I believe it was Columbus Street, from their 1940s era condo buildings. You can see the picture there. They actually installed this quite a while ago. They just never got their reimbursement paperwork back to us. So this was installed in summer of last year. So you can see it's grown in quite nicely over the preceding year. The total cost for this project was $7,080.84. So they are eligible for their maximum $3,500 in cost share. Here's the before picture. Sorry, it's Dinwiddie Street, not Columbus Street. Steep sloped. It was all either ivy or grass before, and now it's this nice mulch bed of natives. Any questions or issues with the Fairlington Villages Conservation Landscaping Project? Okay, I will.
That is steep.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, there's a lot of steep slopes in that community. They're potentially doing another BCAP project with us this coming year, so we'll see. They're looking at a rain garden. Contract number 2020-8 is the Luco Rain Garden. The total cost for this rain garden was $7,000, which makes them eligible for the maximum $3,500 in cost share. They wanted to capture the runoff from several of their back downspouts before it flows towards their backyard and past their pool. So here's them digging it out. You can see it was a pretty deep rain garden. This is what it looked like before. On the left-hand side, you can see the edge of the pool in green right here, and they were going to put the rain garden just between their house and their pool. And actually, the shape of the pool is the kidney shape, and they mirrored it exactly with the kidney shape of their rain garden. So it's almost like a little mini pool right there. And they have a stepping stone walkway across it, and then on the lower side where they have their overflow, they line that with flagstone, and then the water spills out into a short dry creek bed. And actually all of these gravels that they have in their dry creek bed were excavated from the rain garden itself. They're down in the Alexandria area, so they have a lot of these rounded rocks in their soil. Any questions about the Lucco rain garden? Judy and I both looked at this one, and it looked quite good in terms of its design and build quality. The next one, 2020-23, is the Conkle Conservation Landscaping. The total cost for this project was $15,925, which qualifies them for the maximum VCAP cost share of $3,500. Despite that cost, the homeowners actually did a good bit of work themselves in prepping the soil and kind of knocking back some of the invasives that were there before they came in and planted. It's a pretty large scale project. There's the planting plan itself. And they did it in kind of two phases. One was along a very steep slope, which you can see here. Originally, it was a lot of ivy and other invasives and eroding soil. And now it's native landscaping bed, good mulch coverage. I guess that's it. Any questions about the Conkle Conservation Landscaping?
And a question about cost. What is the money paying for here? They haven't done any grading. They've just spread mulch and planted plants, or is there more to it that we don't see?
I think it's mostly plants and the labor, but again, Judy may know a little bit better than me, but this designer tends to plant very densely, and the plant costs do increase significantly as a result.
Hey, that's
Yeah, I mean, she does include, I'm not justifying her costs, but she does include a very in-depth analysis and provides a homeowner with a lot of, let's say, hand-holding and design work and alternatives. So her costs do seem to run higher, and it is surprising, but they were working on this very steep slope, and they did have a pretty thick amount of invasives. And I believe also there was the Army Corps of Engineers open channel along the side, which they did some work on as well. I don't think that was part of the cost share, but there was a little confusion about what they should be including in their final invoice. So that invoice is actually the total amount that they paid to the landscaper, and it may not have had the specifics of some of the detail work pulled out of it, unfortunately.
okay. Well, okay. I'm not going to keep pushing that.
So that is it for the 11 FY 2020 projects for reimbursement.
Put them to bed. Almost.
Quite a few bucks we'll be asking for from the state.
All right, and we'll take the screen back. Everybody can hang in there for our final piece of the VCAP presentation. All right. So we have been looking at VCAP policies and also considering some proposed program changes for the upcoming year. What I want to do today is just run over some of the basic outline of what we've been working on, and then ask you about your input, ask your input on some of the policy changes we're considering recommending. But first, I wanted to let you all know last week we got a introduction to the new district guide to VCAP from the state association, and it's a great guide. They did a webinar for us, for everyone interested last week. It's a really great document that will doesn't replace the VCAP manual as we know it. It's an additional resource guide, especially helpful for districts coming new to the program. We've got some more districts coming online with VCAP this year, so this will be really helpful for them. And it's also really a nice one-stop shop kind of document for all of us. So although it doesn't have everything in it, it certainly links to all the information and specifications and things like that that we need to run VCAP as a district. But we are looking at our own policies, and that's what I'm going to be discussing today. And just wanted to throw this into the mix because this certainly is in the background of all the decisions that, all the things that we're thinking about. We are looking to make sure that VCAP is meeting our district goals. And so as we go through, we are thinking how this program works to meet these goals. And I mean, personally, I'm so impressed with how well VCAP does meet our district goals in terms of really getting the word out on natural resource conservation and working with homeowners and providing really good technical assistance in many ways and many different areas, and really positive working a way to work with folks and also with the county. So I think all together, it's really checking some boxes for us. But on to creating the district policy document. This is something that was started under Christina, and the basic outline of it shown here. What we're working on is to basically give an introduction to the program as it functions here in Northern Virginia, our funding sources, the staff roles and responsibilities. And then where I really want to focus today are these two items, the secondary policies and the a little bit more about the application process that we follow here, as it is different from other districts in the state. And then there's some other items that we are really working hard to standardize and really put down on paper what requirements we have for record keeping, what our internal procedures are. And then last but not least is to develop a more robust program assessment for the program. So the moving on to the proposed program changes that I wanted to bring to you, there are 4 what I would consider somewhat major policy changes that we'd like to discuss. And then there are 3 program additions that are things that we think are very important to wrap into our VCAP and CAP programs. So first, address probably the biggest policy change we'd like to recommend is really for the CAP program and the county funds. And that is an issue that staff, I think, has been faced with in recent times as we work with communities, HOAs in particular, where they have large number of households. They have often a fair amount of acreage under common ownership. And oftentimes the severity of the resource concerns is really, really very apparent and very threatening to some of our waterways, our RPAs, and adjacent areas to these communities. And many of these older developments don't have stormwater management on site. So they're really just in terms of what kind of what they can, the impact they can have is great, but also they're really great for our more outreach education element of the program, because it does connect us to a much wider audience. You know, not only a lot of residents in these communities, but they are also connected with newsletters. They have boards that get word out to them. So just the photos there, it's a pretty typical condition on the left that we encounter in communities around the area. Of course, you just saw Fairlington Village, the nice conservation landscaping that's very visible to many folks who live here, and a lovely addition to their community as they stroll through or walk their dogs. So, oh, sorry, I should leave it there because that's the issue that we're addressing, described, but how we want to address it is to increase the number of grants that a homeowners association or civic association can apply for. So this is with the idea that there are multiple households represented here, and right now we're limiting them to 2 grants per civic association or homeowners association. We have worked with some that own numerous parcels and tried to say, okay, well, if you have different parcels, you can apply for a grant per parcel. But what we'd like to do here is just finalize what we think the best approach is to provide more assistance to these larger communities without without allowing them to kind of monopolize our resources either. So our recommendation is that we force the 2 grants per association as the minimum, but as the associations get larger, they can apply for more, up to a maximum of 5 grants per association. And that would be 1 per 10 households would be how it would ramp up to the maximum of 5 grants. Of course, each grant must address a separate and distinct resource concern, as is the program. And the other element we do see a lot is that conservation landscaping is certainly a very proven and accessible practice. And so we'd like to lift the $3,500 cap on that for the HOAs in the CAP program, so that they would be able to, in essence, they could, if it was appropriate, apply for 5 grants, and they could all be conservation landscaping, or they could be any number of different practices within the VCAP toolbox. So that would be very interested to hear your questions and what you think of that change.
Judy, just to add a little bit more context, because it can be kind of confusing. The $3,500 cap, as you mentioned, for conservation landscaping, same cap for rain gardens and dry wells. That cap per project wouldn't change, but the state rules and the ones that we followed up to this point say that if a homeowner or an HOA installs a conservation landscaping project that is eligible for $3,500 in cost share, then they can't apply for any more of that project type. So they have a conservation landscaping project in one area of the HOA and they get $3,500 in cost share, even if they haven't met the maximum 2 or 5 projects for that entire HOA. They can't apply for any other conservation landscaping projects from that point on because they've already gotten $3,500 for conservation landscaping. Same thing happens with a rain garden. If they put a rain garden in one spot and on the far side of the HOA was another good spot for a rain garden, but they've already gotten $3,500 from that first project, the current rules don't allow them to apply for any more rain garden funding, even if we think that's the best solution for this other resource problem. So it's not that the cap for a single project has changed. It's still going to be $3,500 for a single project, but rather what we're saying is that they can then apply for other conservation landscaping or dry well or rain garden projects and other parts of the property if we think that's the best solution for them. And they can,
Dan and
they can
Judy,
do that.
question. The cap money is county money. Is anybody in the county we need to go to and say we're making some rule changes, or do they understand that we just follow whatever the VCAP rules are?
So they are, as I understand it, they are looking to us to provide that guidance based on our experience with VCAP. And from our perspective, we are trying to keep CAP very much in line with VCAP for our own sanity, but also because it's the proven program, and that's where we think we should be at with the CAP program as well. And so this is something that we could do and could recommend because it is county funds. But to answer your question, my understanding is that you all are the ones who would provide that guidance to the county.
Okay, as long as there's nobody outside of us we need to go to and say, we have a contract with you, now we're getting ready to break it. I don't want, don't want to get a crack with who. I know these EIP projects. It's kind of like up to us to run, but I just want to know, what I hear is we don't need to go tell anybody else we're making this modification. Right?
We'll definitely defer to Laura to provide any more specificity to that.
We do not, Jerry. It would be informational to them. So
Thanks.
All right, any other thoughts or any concerns about moving that direction? I think Dan and Maria and I all see this as a valuable improvement, to be able to help some of these communities that are really trying to do the right thing in their communities and can really use the help. That knowing that they got a grant is a lot of times a very big plus to a board of directors, and so we'll take this forward if that makes sense to you all, and see how it works out.
Judy, I think it makes a lot of sense. A lot of times in this, especially in these multi-dwelling communities, the problems are multiple, but they can be solved by the same principle. And if there's potential for us to help them address similar problems with similar practices that we are convinced is what would help, I think that makes some sense.
I think so too. And I think this makes it a little bit of a fair project, since for CAP, you actually get extra points in your application if you're working with your next door neighbor. So let's say you're a single family homeowner, you're doing conservation landscaping in your property and your neighbor's doing conservation landscaping too. That actually boosts you up in terms of your points a little bit. Whereas for HOAs, we're almost punishing them in a way, saying that, you might represent 400 or 500 households in the cases of some of these larger HOAs, but we're limiting you to just 2 projects, regardless of where those projects are. So I think this makes a little bit more equity for those communities and puts them on a more even footing with the individual property owners.
I was going to draw a little parallel, maybe, I'm not sure if it's too much of a stretch, and ask Willie for the ag cost share. I know those are larger parcels and normally just one landowner, whereas this one is multi-family. But is there a similar sort of cap for ag cost share for the total funds they can receive or total number of projects, or is there anything sort of similar?
I
Yes,
was going to add, this approach sounds good. The other question I had was I can't remember how it works out that you guys help Arlington administer funds, and would this similar thing apply to the Arlington program?
No, CAP funds are only eligible to be spent on Fairfax County HOAs and civic associations and places of worship.
I would hope that, as with other things, that if we roll this out and find that it's working successfully with these groups, that the state would consider it as a change to the VCAP process, in which case it would then come back to Arlington.
So if I may go back to Maria's question, trying to parallel this with agricultural cost share practices. Yes, there's a cap, but there is no limitation or restriction to duplicating a similar process, a similar practice in another area of the farm that the one area is not treating. So yeah, you may have 2 waterways on your farm going in different directions, as long as you haven't reached the cap yet. You may have multiple other things, and most of those things also have a lifespan, and that's part of our secondary criteria, which I just talked about earlier. We would want to give preference to another practice in another location over improving the same practice that had been there prior, that has expired its lifetime. So there is a cap, and there's preference to do similar practice at another location as opposed to coming back and trying to fix this one that has expired.
Thank you.
Shall I move on from this one?
Yes.
The next item is maybe more of a clarification than an actual change. And this would be just in terms of how we address the resource concern of excess runoff. The VCAP guidance on this is that it should see standing water or bare soil or evidence of sediment runoff in order to qualify as a resource concern. And this is something that's just come up being in our urban situation where we are really looking toward roof runoff disconnection and trying to prevent that water from entering the stormwater system before it's had a chance to at least a chance to infiltrate, if not fully infiltrate. So the recommendation here is to simply say you don't need to find that, here on this photo of one of our recent projects. This side of the property looks good. You wouldn't say there was really a resource concern there. Here under the trees, obviously we're getting more of that familiar refrain of shade and slope and runoff. But I think that we can actually make an improvement in how much runoff is entering the stormwater system by just simply saying, we know there's excess runoff on this property because of that roof and that driveway. And if there's a way for the homeowner to address it in the program, we want to see that as sufficient. They don't need to go pull up their turf or something to qualify for it. So again, as I say that it's more of a clarification, but I'd love to hear your feedback on that as well.
What is the criteria now for distance to the conveyance system?
Max is 100 feet.
Feet.
And there are additional points given in the ranking for being within 40 feet. And in this photo, the curb and gutter, as I think we discussed recently, is considered part of that stormwater system.
Right.
So that does go directly to the stream, basically.
Thank you.
I like the idea, Judy, because I've gone to several site visits where the homeowner was trying to do the right thing and basically just trying to reduce runoff volume from their property. But looking at their property, the grass was growing well. The soil looked to be in good shape, so there was no erosion or patchy plant growth or bare soil that I could see. So the project ranked fairly low, even though I think they would have created quite a bit of water quality benefit by reducing, the volume of runoff leaving their site and flowing into either the street or their neighbor's property or what have you. So this would help clarify that those types of projects have value.
Yeah, I've come a couple times. Folks have actually apologized for how nice their turf looks. They're like, we have a problem, but it just doesn't look like it. There are no other thoughts on that one. I'll continue on. So this is one that I know there's a long history with the district on how to deal with the permeable pavement costs and how much the cost share provided. The state is very generous with the $10,000. At this point, it's a $10,000 cost share max based on square footage or just based on the cost of the project. Here in Northern Virginia, you all did a lot of research and consideration of this issue and came up with a policy of $3 per square foot that's of impervious area treated. And so I think just as we saw with the Longs project, that actually worked out pretty well. They didn't come anywhere close to the $10,000 cap, but they did. I think it may well have, this policy may have encouraged them to do that deeper gravel reservoir that Dan highlighted and include their rooftop. It did, I think by my calculations, it did probably double almost the amount of cost share they were able to receive. I think they would have only gotten $2,600 if it had just been the square footage of the permeable pavement, for example. So including that rooftop and using that gravel reservoir really improved the project in terms of its efficiency and meeting our goals. However, there is sort of a, I think there's a what I call a donut hole or a gap maybe for the smaller projects that might come through. We have also found that many people who are interested in permeable pavements have decided not to apply to VCAP because it doesn't seem like worth it in a sense for the amount that they would receive back. And so I wanted to just run through in a little detail 5 concerns that that are underlying this recommendation, which is to allow an option of receiving a $3,500 max at 75% of the cost of the practice, similar to rain gardens, conservation landscaping, dry wells, so that we aren't actually, in some cases, penalizing folks who do permeable pavement over those other practices. So the first thing is, I think as we all recognize, people, the permeable pavement is popular. People like the aesthetics of it, and it's easy for homeowners to understand that this BMP will improve the value of their property. This is just in Arlington, not one of our projects, but you know, just caught my eye. It's very, very attractive property. And I don't have any of the stats on this one, but I think it's an indication of, you know, this is just something, it's very visible in the neighborhood. People will want to learn more about it. So I think we don't want to discount the value of introducing stormwater management on a property owner's property through the use of permeable pavement and even small projects to help with the first flush and do hold some amount of water. The next concern is that the technical assistance that we provide with this program is really significant. Just in my short time with the district, I've been aware of how much time that we really do devote to making sure these projects are working well and are the best they can be. And the technical assistance that homeowners receive is pretty significant through the program. So permeable pavements really do need that. This is a poster child in my mind because this is an applicant we've been working with here in Falls Church, and he really wants to do permeable pavement. He's got kind of a steep driveway. He's done a lot of other things on his property. You can see the plantings. He's got solar panels. He really wants to do everything he can with his property to be as low on the impact scale as possible. And he's needed some help to weed through the proposals he's gotten. He had 3 proposals. They were all different. And it's a complicated project. So I think that technical assistance, whether or not he ends up applying for a grant, has been very useful for him. The other issue here with technical assistance is that this would, by being a VCAP project, it would put it in a 10-year maintenance program, which is really important to the successful interaction of permeable pavements over the long haul. They really do need some maintenance, and that 10-year maintenance commitment, I think, is an important element. Folks who are putting in permeable pavements not through a program like this are you know, they're on their own in many ways just to navigate all of that. The fourth concern I wanted to bring up is what I refer to as the donut hole for smaller projects. And bear with me, I hope I can clearly explain this, but I took 2 projects that are both recent. One is a permeable pavement project and the other is a rain garden. Project A was 425 square feet of permeable pavement. The homeowner removed 513 square feet of an old driveway And so the driveway she put in was 425 square feet. And then the remainder of the old driveway area was turned into conservation landscaping. It was not part of the application, but she installed on her own dime, 100%. And so the driveway actually has 170 cubic foot capacity now with the gravel reservoir they put in there. The project B was a rain garden, 569 square feet of impervious area treated from the rooftop. The rain garden's 108 square foot surface area, 53 cubic foot capacity. And with that, of course, no impervious area was removed. So they're both good projects. They're both really meeting all our requirements as far as staff and you all have reviewed. But the difference is pretty astounding that the project A cost $13,491 and she received $1,539 in cost share. And the rain garden was $5,900 and she was able to receive the $3,500 cost share. So just in terms of kind of fairness of implementation of the program, I think that's a real issue to address for us. If Project A could have applied for the 75% cost share at a max of $3,500, at least it would have been in line with our participation. It's actually almost triple the amount of capacity of stormwater, and so I think it would be worth considering for these kinds of smaller projects that addition. And then just lastly, small projects can have a big impact, and a small patio might well only treat a small roof, but it is actually multiplied over many places, could actually have a pretty good impact. This patio, 120 square foot patio, as I show here, could capture up to 48 cubic feet of stormwater. And right now this would result in a $1,500 plus or minus cost share from us. And that's with an assumed $50 per square foot cost. And there are issues, that's harder right now to get smaller permeable pavement projects even in the ground, because just to show up on site for some of these folks, it is expensive. So the smaller projects are sometimes harder to fund, but there are, enterprising contractors who are looking for new areas to work in, and this certainly could be a good area to develop as a business.
Are you ready for comments?
Yes, please comment.
Let me give you a little history and fill in. I think Chris and Monica, if she were here, probably don't know this. The $3 a square foot was not for the permeable pavement size. It was for the captured area, which includes roofs, and a lot of roofs got tied in after we came up with that policy, because they weren't being tied in before. They were just, the driveways were just catching whatever fell in the driveway. So that was good. But the $3 a square foot was supposed to be temporary. I talked about this with Lily way back when, that obviously been a long time. And I said, at the same time, I want you or the staff or somebody to look at the whole rationale for the cost share and see if we couldn't put it on a basis of dollars per sediment, nitrogen and phosphorus kept out of the stormwater system, whether it's creeks or curbs or whatever. That second part never happened. Nobody's been pushing for it. So I'm going to withdraw it. And I withdraw support for the $3 a square foot, because the costs of, at the time, the permeable paving projects were exceeding $10 per square foot of installed driveway. Well, I mean, we're looking at conservation landscaping projects now that are up to $15 a square foot. I mean, the whole thing's gotten nuts. Nobody's exerting any cost control. The program doesn't require it. and except for, limits on how much we'll fund anything. And there doesn't seem to be any motivation on anybody's part to try to rationalize these costs in terms of the benefits the projects provide. So what I hear you suggesting is not that the $3,500 cap, the permeable pavements would be treated the same as any other VCAP project with a $3,500 cap. But it's not really an option. That would be the way to do it. That would totally bypass the $3 a square foot, which at this point, I don't care anymore.
Well, I share the pain on the metrics for what these practices actually accomplish, and I think that's something that Maura Christian at the State Association is doing a really great job of capturing that data, and for the State Association. So I think that's something we could actually have a better handle on now than before, and I'm happy to have that conversation with her and see what we can come up with. I do think, the State Association, the steering committee is looking at how much of the state funding is going to permeable pavements, because the southern, some of the Norfolk area and all are doing a lot of permeable pavements and maxing out that $10,000 cost share that the state program has. So I think my understanding is we've been looking for something that does give us more value for the dollar spent in Northern Virginia, but I'm happy to entertain, where that goes from here. I really appreciate your comments that helped clarify, the position that where we've been and maybe where we need to go with it.
And Judy, just to be clear, we are suggesting here that not necessarily eliminating that $3 per impervious square foot, but treating it as an option. So you can either apply for a cost share based upon the $3 per impervious square foot treated, or for a smaller project where you might not have a tremendous amount of impervious square footage, you can cost share it at 75% of the project cost up to $3,500. So basically people would choose whichever one works out best for them. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. And thanks for the reminder, because I think the project that you presented, the Longs, is a good example of how the district's policy did actually double the impact of that project, because they apparently were not considering putting that roof runoff into that Frattville reservoir initially, and I'm sure the fact that they could double their cost share had something to do with it, I would guess. So it is restrictive, but I think treating the impervious area, as you spoke about, Jerry, is really a good idea, and something that actually the state may consider, adding into the state program level. So as Dan said, this is really just kind of treating that gap for smaller projects, just to make sure that at least for now we are treating them equitably with some of the other projects that go in the ground.
Do I understand then that the larger permeable pavement projects are still competitive? We still have people applying for the larger ones at $3 a square foot of treated impermeable area?
Well, I will say that we have had some apply, like the Longs, where they did actually get $4,700, I think, somewhere in that range of cost, $4,000 of cost share. So a little over the $3,500 max would be it with this new option. But we've also lost a lot of people. People will call and ask about it, and when they hear that it's $3 per square foot return, they really aren't interested in pursuing it. And you could sort of go into the weeds about why that is, but I know out of 6 folks, I believe out of 14 applications that Maria worked on last year, the site visits, she did 14, and 6 of them said they were primarily interested in permeable pavement at the get-go. And one of them, I believe, is the one which I showed you, which we've been working with a great deal to try and make it possible. See what project they can make work on his property. So that's not a very good track record if 5 out of the 6 are dissuaded from it, either from participating in our program or from the concept completely. Partly
Yeah,
that's technical help because some of them were too steep perhaps, or that kind of thing. Just wasn't an appropriate project once we got onto the site.
Yeah, because permeable pavements is probably one of the best treatment options. I mean, we're essentially removing phosphorus from the stormwater. We probably haven't picked up much phosphorus if it's just roof runoff and what's fallen on the driveway, but nevertheless, you know, it's an infiltration method. It's not just a runoff, you know, slowing down method. I never meant to disadvantage permeable pavements compared to alternatives. But that was supposed to be a $3 that was temporary while we studied, you know, making the reimbursement based upon actual benefits. Hasn't happened. So I would let the $3 limit be temporary too. Okay.
Yeah.
Let it go away.
It might be something, would it be worth revisiting it in terms of just raising that per dollar, you know, per square foot dollar amount? Or you're thinking that it should, I mean, our other option would be to go back to just the state practice right now, what the state criteria is, which is 75% of the cost share of the cost of the project.
And that, do I understand that's up to a limit of 10,000 instead of 4,500?
Right, correct.
What other practices have a $10,000 limit?
Let's see, I think green roofs, bioretention.
The engineered practices.
Right.
Infiltration trench too.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Now,
right.
the whole thing was trying to get to a point that I had proposed and done a lot of homework on. I took the method to the point where we only had to say how many dollars per pound of phosphorus removed per year, and for nitrogen and for sediments, would we apply to all projects. And that means there would be some additional homework, you know, on your part and Dan's part, whoever's working recap project, to sit down and figure out the tributary areas, and then figure out the runoff from the whole tributary area, not just the roofs, and you know, impermeable surfaces. The state has had a spreadsheet now for several years since I came up with this and went through it, where we plug in that number, maybe coordinate it with the Virginia Association people so it becomes acceptable to other districts as well, and put it on a basis where we're paying for specific benefits having to do with what the program is established for, which is remove nutrient sediments of the bay. That's what the funding is coming in for. That nobody's picked up on that idea either on our board or the state association if it was ever presented to them. So I'm going to withdraw that. It was a good idea. I'm a majority of one, and so I'm not going to continue to pursue it. My suggestion is at this point that we put permeable pavements back with the state criteria and just let them pay.
I think we can take some of that feedback back to the team and take that into consideration. Maybe we need to revisit this and bring it back next month as part of the policies.
Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it very much because it's been very helpful for me to hear that, Jerry. So I really do appreciate your going into some of the detail on it. And I look forward to that conversation. Yeah. I will I think this is the last one of the sort of larger policy considerations, and that is again, maybe it's more of a clarification, but we have seen conservation landscaping on steep slopes. This is one that I was just at a couple of weeks ago for its reimbursement inspection, and I think while the program does allow for cost share for soil stabilization materials like biologs, the erosion and terracing kinds of materials like timber, landscape logs, the biologs, and the jute fabric. Those are all things that can be cost shared on steeper slopes. But for our district, I think I would propose, and I think it would be a good idea that we actually have the expectation that those be used in the steep slope conservation landscaping. So that may, again, just be in terms of how we review the applications. But I think it's something that we could formalize as an expectation at the outset of a project, rather than coming back to an applicant saying, well, this is great, but we'd like to see biologs or something. Just set that expectation at the beginning of an application.
We may not be this far along, but did you have a cutoff point for what's considered steep?
Well, the program does say 15%. And so in the conservation landscaping CL3 mulch beds, it does address, that where slopes steeper than 15%, the biologs can be, and timber can be cost shared. So it kind of gives us the opening, and I'm just saying, let's just kind of nail that down. So we are seeing steep slopes with a little more aggressive reinforcement stabilization.
Just for clarification, I thought some of those things are cost shared because the overall cost would include the cost for biolog. And one thing I was hoping, unless I'm misunderstanding it, is that probably those items are cost shared or paid for as an addition to the landscaping cost, because one or two of my cooperators have backed out and have expressed the fact that, well, look, why don't you guys pay for the biolog separately, as opposed to saying, hey, it's all total cost is 75% or cap of 3,500.
Yeah, I think this might be a baby step towards more robust responses, but right now, I think getting it into the sort of a steep slope conservation practice would be the first step in my view, in terms of getting folks on the same page, and it would be included in the cost share, and it would, as it is now, but we would be saying, if you have a slope of 15% or greater, the project must include soil stabilization measures, including timber or biolog terracing. And then we work with them to figure out what that is specifically. But they know going into the project that will be part of the cost of it. We have one currently where the homeowner apparently was sort of balking at the idea of purchasing biologs, even though we're recommending it and it's a steep slope. And they don't have to take our recommendation. It might change how we view the application when it comes into us.
So the suggestion here is that we make it mandatory for over 15%?
Right.
I think it would be nice to have that certainty, so we don't get like the project you mentioned, we don't start moving down the road towards an application and then it comes in and it just doesn't look like it's going to be a sufficient project to control the erosion. We can say to that homeowner in the outset, oh, you've got a 20% slope back here. You can do conservation landscaping, but we need to see some terracing or some erosion control matting as part of the project. And we'll cost share that, but if that's not involved, then no, we don't think that's going to work. So then that they can make that decision at the outset before they start doing work and finding contractors and getting bids. I think that'll add to the certainty and clarity of what's required.
Dan, what other methods would we use besides car logs, timbers, and the matting? Is that the suite of things we can do?
Yeah, conceivably they could do some more other sort of terracing, but and Judy knows better than me what materials can be cost shared. But I don't think if you were to put in a brick or a stone retaining wall, which could be quite helpful, I don't think we can cost share that.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. That anything, as I read it, it's anything that is biodegradable, basically can be cost shared, but anything that's constructed out of non-biodegradable materials is not part of the cost share. But that could be their choice, and they could do that to meet our requirement for having some soil stabilization on a steep slope.
Isn't that funny that we'd pay, $10,000 instead of $3,500 for permeable pavers, but we wouldn't pay for permanent materials on a conservation landscape? What? I'm not sure I understand the logic in the state policy. What
I think it comes down to functionality. And, Quiralog provides a similar functionality regardless of, I guess, long-term permanence. Maybe I don't have a really great answer for that, but I know that when there was a discussion about it, it had more to do with the function and the promotion of the function as opposed to the aesthetic of a stone stack wall or a brick wall. So that's what I think they're trying to tease out. Still a ways to go, and I like to say a lot with the ag cost share program. They still have a technical advisory committee that meets every year, even though that program's been around for decades, to tease out some of these, challenges that they have with that program as well. So.
Yeah, and I think on the ground, the practical answer too is that any kind of stone or brick terracing wall would, quickly be way beyond the $3,500 type budget of a VCAP project. But
Right.
that the state wants to see that money put into things that will actually be part of the soil, part of the biological process.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's not our
And
job to
conservation-
rationalize the state program, I guess.
Well, and conservation landscaping, I think we all can agree, is kind of a different beast too. It's a different animal than the other more structural and infiltration practices. So it does have a lot of other sort of pieces to it in terms of how people want to develop or plant their landscape. We get into the benches and the little stone walkways and the pagodas and the fish gardens.
Judy, everybody, I just wanted to acknowledge the time. I need to jump off here at 1:30. So we've got only about 5 minutes or so that we've got a little time for, transitioning, refreshing before, other things. We've had a lot of people jump off already too. I think, Jerry, you're the only board member that's remaining, and then we've got staff. Which, congratulations, you're just integrated here, which is totally fine. It's been a great conversation.
Do we have
Judy,
any more points?
Yeah, they're just actually, I think I have 4 or 5 more slides, but they're on the criteria, internal ranking criteria, and this one is, I think, it's a no-brainer. We want to incorporate the state's Our Trees Count program into ours so that our VCAP participants are counting their trees, and we'll just incorporate that with our materials so that they know to do that when they get to the end of their project. Just part of our partnering efforts. And then a couple of internal ranking criteria we're adding in this year. One is the DEI work that the district as a whole is undertaking, and this will be for us to be able to start to zero in on communities that are underserved and that we want to bring this program to them. So we will be looking at the Fairfax County Vulnerability Index to actually help with our ranking process as we get requests for VCAP.
And Judy, I just want to acknowledge this is something we've incorporated as part of our internal site visit ranking criteria previously, but this format, the vulnerability index, was developed through the One Fairfax initiative, and it's really, really comprehensive. So what we were using before, which was subsidized lunches or income, this is much more comprehensive. There's quite a bit of overlap, but this is becoming the index to use in Fairfax County. So it really does align very well with local goals.
And I know Jim had this map overlaid with the tree canopy map for a presentation a week or so ago, which was really fascinating because it very much aligns. There's a very similar pattern. So really great data that we're getting to be able to work with. And then the last one is just to mention the Long Branch Central Watershed Project at the county. It's a really innovative, like all hands on deck effort to a stream restoration project with multiple prongs to it, a lot of different projects going into this watershed effort. And so we are part of that team, and we're going to be working to identify VCAP projects within Long Branch Central and rank them accordingly in our internal criteria, as well as be part of the larger outreach efforts of the work. So that's an exciting one to be a part of.
Yeah, I'm all for that one, and I think I'd like to hear maybe the next technical review committee, what our role is in Long Branch and what we're doing, what else we might do.
That'd be great.
I like doing this stuff, not always on a property by property basis, but look at watersheds, makes sense.
Right. Yeah, it's got a lot of energy and enthusiasm to it, I think, too.
Yeah.
Also just finish with this one quickly. It's just again trying to simplify and clarify our program for those outside and understand what it is. This is not anything we need to get into, but just again, part of the policy document work is to create a timeline of the project and help explain it to folks so they feel like they can jump in there and take part and not be overwhelmed by it. And I'll end there.
I like that.
Very good. Thank you.
So, and just
So
to
more to come.
acknowledge, yeah, and just to acknowledge, Judy, in regards to sort of our timeline, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but based on our last conversation, we are going to be opening it up for site visit requests. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Starting on July 1. So we will be, anyway, do you want to explain your timetable?
Sure. Since I guess I should have had this one first, but yeah, so we will have the request for site visits start up in July 1, and folks can submit those all the way through August 15th, as this shows. And then at that point, the site assessment period starts, and that's when staff will schedule site visits with each of the selected participants. And that generally finishes up around November, end of November, depending on schedules and weather, et cetera. But we want to emphasize this year that folks can begin their application as soon as they've had that site visit and a recommendation from a staff person to go forward. So we will try really hard this year to get some of those applications moving early on in the process. So we see application submission and review. We're hoping that, we get more people going here instead of everybody all bunched up here at the end on the red dot, as we experienced this year due to COVID and other factors. So these long timelines here are when applicants can submit their applications and be reviewed by us and brought to the board for a decision. And so they could start as early as back here in the fall or late winter with their project if they are on the ball back up here where they need to submit their application.
Nice.
Good. I'm sorry, this was such a long meeting. Jerry, once again, you proved yourself at the seedling sale as well.
Yeah, I'm a nerd. I like this stuff.
And you must be a long distance runner or something too. You have the staying power.
Well, great. Well, Thank you, Judy. And there may be a few of these items that we want to just kind of go over real quickly at the, or we can have Adria emphasize at the board meeting as well in regards to the timetable and some of the policies as well. So you may want to be prepared for just a few questions at that time. But with that, is there anything else that is really urgent that needs to be brought up in a minute? Okay. Well, thank you all very much. That was a lot of work. This was a long meeting. Jerry, thanks for sticking with us. And we'll make sure that the rest of the board will have this report for the board to be able to see some of the recommendations that are coming out today. And Judy, we can touch base on some of the items that we'll need some further discussion on before bringing them for decision by the board. But great meeting. Thank you all very much. I guess we'll look forward to seeing everybody again in July on the 20th. And we'll start that one at 10 a.m. Next year, we'll make sure that we plan accordingly for the July meeting, for the June TRC meeting, and have some extra time set aside for that. So, but thanks everyone for sticking with it.
Look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes, looking forward to it. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.